The grand ceremonial hall of House Arrowsong fell silent. 16-year-old Kellen Arrowsong stood frozen, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his hip. His fingers trembled with rage as he watched the viscous glob of alien saliva slide down the ancient family crest that had hung in the Arrowsong ducal hall for 17 generations. General Krythax of the Kravtor Dominion. His scaled face contorted in a smirk, turned slowly to face the stunned assembly of nobles. His enormous frame, nearly 8 feet tall and covered in battle-scarred green scales, seemed to absorb all light in the hall. "This," he growled, gesturing toward the defiled crest, "is what I think of your peace treaties. House Arrowsong has grown weak. The marsh planets deserve stronger leadership." Kellen's vision narrowed, blood pounding in his ears. The ceremonial sword at his side, a gift for his 16th birthday just 2 weeks prior, seemed to call to his hand. Before he realized what he was doing, the blade was free from its scabbard, gleaming in the light of Dampton's 3 moons that filtered through the crystalline dome overhead. "You dare?" Kellen's voice cracked with emotion. The young heir's slender frame tensed as he lunged forward, the tip of his blade aimed at the general's throat. He never reached his target. A firm hand gripped his wrist, stopping the blade mere inches from Krythax's scales. Lysandra, his swordmaster and guardian, held him firmly. "Not here, young prince," she whispered, her voice a mix of warning and compassion. "Not like this." The gathering had erupted into chaos. Representatives from 7 species across the Galactic Coalition surged to their feet, some calling for order, others for blood. Kellen's father, Crown Prince Therion, moved swiftly between his son and the alien general, his face a careful mask of diplomatic neutrality despite the grievous insult. "General Krythax," Therion said, his voice carrying across the hall. "You test the boundaries of diplomatic immunity. I suggest you remember that you stand in the heart of Arrowsong territory." Krythax laughed, a sound like stones grinding together. "Your territory shrinks by the day. Therion, the marsh planet's whisper of rebellion, the colony worlds look to stronger leadership." His yellow eyes fixed on Kellen. "And your heir draws steel at an insult. Perhaps the rumors of Arrowsong weakness are not exaggerated." Kellen struggled against Lysandra's grip, but the swordmaster was far stronger than her slender frame suggested. "The boy needs discipline," Krythax continued. "In the Kravtor Dominion, such impulsiveness would be beaten out of a prince." "We are not savages," Therion replied evenly, though Kellen could see the muscles in his father's jaw tighten. "Unlike some, we do not resolve matters with violence when words will suffice." The general's tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "Words. Always words with the Arrowsongs. Words did not save your colonies during the Scarlet Incursion. Words did not prevent the humiliation of your house when we claimed the Vermilion Moons." He leaned forward. "And words will not save you when the Coalition fragments, as it surely will," with a final contemptuous glance at the defiled crest. Krythax turned and strode from the hall, his entourage of scaled warriors falling in behind him. The doors sealed with a hiss of hydraulics, leaving the assembly in stunned silence. Only when the general had gone did Lysandra release Kellen's wrist. The young heir immediately moved toward the crest, pulling a silk cloth from his formal attire to clean away the alien spittle. "He will pay for this," Kellen muttered, his voice shaking with fury. "By all the stars of Dampton, he will pay." His father approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Control yourself, son. There are more eyes watching us than you know." Kellen looked up at his father, seeing the weariness behind his diplomatic mask. "How can you let him walk away after such an insult? That monster murdered grandfather, led the assault on our colonies, and now he spits on our very heritage." Therion's voice dropped to a whisper. Politics. Kellen, the coalition hangs by a thread. One wrong move, one declaration of hostility, and we risk everything. The Arrow Song legacy is more than a crest on a wallet, is the peace we've maintained for generations. Kellen jerked away from his father's touch. Peace? We've been at war with the Kravtor for decades. Cold War, Therian corrected. Limited engagements, proxy conflicts, not the full-scale devastation that would come if restraint fails. He glanced around the hall, where dignitaries were beginning to collect themselves. We will discuss this later. For now, show the composure expected of an Arrow Song heir. With that, his father returned to the diplomatic fray, smoothing ruffled feathers and scales among the gathered representatives. Lysandra remained at Kellen's side, her eyes never leaving the exit through which Krythax had departed. You would have died, she said simply. He would have broken your neck before your blade pierced his hide. Kellen knew she was right. The Kravtor were renowned warriors, their natural armor nearly impenetrable to conventional weapons. His ceremonial sword, though sharp, was no match for battle-hardened scales. Then what am I supposed to do? He demanded. Stand by while he insults my family? While he threatens everything we've built? Lysandra's dark eyes studied him. You train, you learn, you prepare. Her voice softened slightly. And you choose your moment more wisely than a public gathering with 50 diplomatic witnesses. The young heir looked at the now clean family crest, the arrow piercing a silver moon, symbolic of the Arrow Song dynasty's claim to Dampton and its 3 moons. Generations of his ancestors had defended that claim, expanded it into a coalition of 7 species across 12 star systems. And now it was all threatening to unravel. I come, Lysandra said. Your father will handle the diplomats, and you have training to complete. As they left the hall, Kellen could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. 16 years old, heir to House Arrow Song, and already caught in the web of interstellar politics that threatened to devour his family's legacy. The spittle might be gone from the crest, but the stain on their honor remained. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a vengeful flame had been kindled, one that would not be easily extinguished. The training arena beneath the Arrow Song Palace was a stark contrast to the ornate ceremonial halls above. Here, there were no delicate crystalline structures or ancient tapestries, only the hard reality of combat preparation. The walls were reinforced alloy, scarred from decades of weapon impacts. The floor was specially designed to absorb energy, protecting trainees from serious injury while teaching them the consequences of failure. Kellen slammed his practice sword into the automated combat drone for the 12th time in succession. The drone, programmed to mimic Kravtor fighting techniques, responded with a counterattack that Kellen barely deflected. Your anger makes you predictable, Lysandra observed from the edge of the training circle. Krythax would read your movements like a child's primer. I don't care, Kellen grunted, launching another attack. This time, the drone slipped past his guard and delivered a painful jolt to his ribs. He doubled over, gasping. Lysandra entered the circle, signaling for the drone to deactivate. 3 weeks ago, you could defeat this program consistently. Now you fight like a cadet on his first day. She crouched beside him. This is exactly what Krythax wanted to unbalance you, to make you react emotionally rather than strategically. Kellen straightened, wincing at the pain in his side. You don't understand, but you didn't see the way he looked at our crest, at my father, at me. He gripped his practice sword tighter, like we were already defeated. I understand more than you know, Lysandra said quietly. I've seen that look before. Something in her tone made Kellen pause. He studied his sword master, her angular features. the faint silver speckling around her temples that belied her age, the barely visible scar that traced from her left ear down her neck, disappearing beneath her training armor. You faced Crythax before. It wasn't a question. But Lysandra nodded anyway. Long before you were born. During the Vermilion Moons campaign. She rarely spoke of her past, and Kellen knew better than to interrupt when she chose to share. I was young, foolish, confident in my abilities. He taught me humility through defeat. Kellen's eyes widened. Lysandra was the finest swordmaster in the 12 systems. The thought of her defeated by anyone seemed impossible. How did you survive? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He decided I was more valuable alive than dead, a trophy of sorts, to remind others of his victory. She touched the scar on her neck. This was his mark. I earned my freedom years later, but never forgot the lesson. What lesson? Kellen asked, suddenly eager to understand. That hatred is a luxury a warrior cannot afford. She took the practice sword from his hand. Hatred blinds. It creates openings. It makes you strike when you should wait, speak when you should listen. She demonstrated a complex maneuver, her movements fluid and precise. Control, Kellen. Not the absence of emotion, but mastery over it. That is what separates a prince from a common soldier. The young heir watched her demonstration, trying to absorb her wisdom along with the technique. But what about justice? What about honor? He killed my grandfather. He's threatening our worlds. And now this insult. Justice and vengeance are not the same, Lysandra replied. One serves the greater good. The other serves only the ego. She returned the practice sword to him. Now, show me the moonlight deflection sequence again, and this time, breathe through your anger. Kellen took the sword, centering himself as he'd been taught. As he moved through the complex sequence of blocks and strikes, he found his mind clearing slightly. The burning rage didn't disappear, but it cooled enough for him to complete the movements with precision. Be better, Lysandra nodded. Now again, but faster. They continued training until sweat soaked through Kellen's underarmor. By the time they finished, the ceremonial hall incident was 3 hours past, but the weight of it still pressed on him. My father will do nothing, he said as they toweled off after training. He'll smooth it over with diplomacy and pretend it never happened. Lysandra studied him. Your father bears responsibilities you cannot yet comprehend. The stability of 12 systems rests on his decisions. And what about our family's honor? What about justice for my grandfather? Those concerns must be balanced against the welfare of billions, she replied. Sometimes personal honor must be sacrificed for the greater good. Kellen threw his towel against the wall in frustration. So Crythax walks free, insults us publicly, and faces no consequences. How is that justice? Lysandra's expression hardened. I didn't say he shouldn't face consequences. I said your father has responsibilities that transcend personal vendetta. She picked up her training gear. There are many forms of justice, young prince. Not all involve drawing blood. As they exited the training arena, Kellen noticed 2 royal guards approaching. Their expressions were grim. Prince Kellen, the senior guard bowed slightly. Your presence is requested in the Royal Council chamber immediately. Lysandra frowned. He's just completed intensive training. Surely this can wait. I'm afraid not. Swordmaster, the guard replied. By order of Crown Prince Therion and the High Council. Kellen and Lysandra exchanged glances. The High Council rarely convened on short notice, and students were never summoned to attend. I'll come with you, Lysandra decided, but the guard shook his head. Forgiveness, Master Lysandra, but the summons is for Prince Kellen alone. A cold feeling settled in Kellen's stomach. Whatever was happening, it couldn't be good. He nodded to Lysandra. "I'll be fine. We'll continue training tomorrow." Her expression suggested she wanted to argue, but years of palace protocol held her in check. "As you wish, Your Highness. Remember what we discussed today. Control, not the absence of emotion, but mastery over it." Kellen followed the guards through the labyrinthine corridors of the Arrowsong Palace. With each step toward the council chamber, the weight of his family legacy seemed to grow heavier. Whatever awaited him behind those doors, he had a feeling it would change everything. The High Council chamber was a perfect circle, ringed with 12 seats representing the 12 major systems under Arrowsong influence. Today, only 7 seats were occupied as fathers, 5 council elders, and, most surprisingly, his mother's. Queen Regent Elia Arrowsong rarely attended council meetings, preferring to exercise her influence through private channels. Her presence indicated the severity of the situation. "Kellen," his father said, gesturing to a small seat positioned in the center of the chamber. "Please sit." The young heir felt exposed as he took the seat, aware of the scrutiny from all sides. His father's expression was unreadable, but his mother's eyes held a mixture of concern and something else, resignation. "Perhaps. Do you understand the gravity of what transpired today?" Elder Voss began. The ancient diplomat's voice rasped like sandpaper. "Do you comprehend what your actions nearly triggered?" Kellen straightened his spine. "General Krythax desecrated our family crest. He insulted our house before representatives of the entire coalition. I responded as any Arrowsong would." "You responded like a child," Elder Voss countered. "Drawing steel in a diplomatic gathering violates every protocol we've established. Had your blade reached its target, we would be at war this very moment." "We are already at war," Kellen argued. "The Kravtor have violated our territories, raided our shipping lanes, and now openly mock us in our own hall. How much more provocation do we need?" His father leaned forward. "Kellen, the coalition stands on the brink. 3 of our member systems are already considering alignment with the Kravtor Dominion. We cannot afford open conflict, so we suffer humiliation instead." Kellen couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "We choose our battles," his mother interjected. Her voice was soft but carried an authority that silenced the chamber. "And this is not one we can win, not yet." Elder Thomas, the military strategist, nodded gravely. "Our intelligence suggests the Kravtor have developed new weapons technology. They want us to strike first, to justify total war while they hold the advantage." Kellen looked from face to face, seeing the concern etched in each expression. "What would you have me do then? Apologize to Krythax for nearly defending our honor?" "Yes," his father said simply. The chamber fell silent. Kellen stared at his father in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "I'm deadly serious," Therion replied. "You will publicly apologize for your breach of diplomatic protocol. You will express regret for drawing your weapon, and you will do this tomorrow, before the full assembly." Kellen felt as though he'd been struck. "Father, you can't ask this of me, of an Arrowsong, of your heir." "I can and I do." Therion's voice grew softer. "Because I ask it not just as your father, but as the crown prince of a dynasty that bears responsibility for billions of lives across 12 systems. And if I refuse?" His mother spoke then. "Then you place your personal pride above the safety of our people. That is not the action of an heir worthy of the Arrowsong name." The words cut deeper than any blade. Kellen looked down at his hands, still calloused from the training session with Lysandra. Hands that had nearly triggered an interstellar war. "There must be another way," he said finally. Elder Voss shook his head. Politics is rarely about what we wish to do, young prince. It is about what we must do. Think of it as strategy, not surrender. His father added, no, we buy time. We strengthen our position. We prepare for the real battle, not this provocation. Kellen felt trapped, cornered by the very responsibilities he had been raised to uphold. The flame of vengeance still burned within him, but now it competed with the weight of duty, of the billions who would suffer if he followed his heart rather than his head. I will do as you ask, he said finally, each word tasting like ash. I will apologize. Relief visibly washed over the council members, but Kellen wasn't finished. But know this, Crithax does not seek peace. He never has. Whatever time we buy with my humiliation, we had better use it well. His father nodded solemnly. We will, son. You have my word. As Kellen left the chamber, the burden of his decision pressed down on him like a physical weight. He had chosen duty over honor, responsibility over vengeance. But the fire inside him had not been extinguished, merely banked, waiting for the right moment to blaze anew. And somewhere within the palace, hidden from all eyes, the first pieces of a dangerous puzzle were already beginning to align. The Arrowsong family quarters occupied the highest spire of the palace, affording spectacular views of Dampton's sprawling capital city and the vast marshlands beyond. Normally, Kellen found peace in watching the sunset cast golden reflections across the wetlands, but tonight the beauty was lost on him. He paced his chambers, replaying the council meeting in his mind. Each step fueled his frustration, his fists clenching and unclenching as he walked. A soft knock at his door interrupted his brooding. Enter, he called, expecting a servant with his evening meal. Instead, his mother glided into the room. Queen Regent Elia Arrowsong moved with the fluid grace that had made her famous across the 12 systems, a former dancer from the Cerulean worlds who had won the heart of Therian Arrowsong decades ago. You're angry, she stated simply, closing the door behind her. Kellen turned away. Wouldn't you be? Tomorrow I must grovel before the murderer of my grandfather, the enemy of our house. Anger is natural, she replied, crossing to the window. But it makes for poor decisions. Or so I've been told. He couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Lysandra says much the same. His mother smiled faintly. She is wise, your sword master, wiser than many on the council. Then why didn't she have a seat at that table? Why wasn't her counsel sought? Politics, Elia sighed. The same reason you must apologize tomorrow. The same reason your father negotiates with enemies rather than destroying them. She turned to face him. Do you think he doesn't feel as you do? That he doesn't see Crithax and remember how his father died? Kellen hadn't considered this. His father always seemed so controlled, so diplomatic. Then why doesn't he act? We have the largest fleet in the coalition, that we could strike and trigger the collapse of everything your ancestors built. She interrupted gently. The coalition exists because the Arrowsongs have always placed peace above pride, prosperity above vengeance. Even when the cost is our honor? Especially then. She approached him, placing a hand on his cheek. True honor is not found in public gestures or defiant stands. It lives in the difficult choices made for the greater good, in sacrifices that go unsung. Kellen wanted to believe her, but the memory of Crithax's smirk as he defiled their crest burned too brightly. There's something else you should know, his mother continued, her voice dropping to near a whisper. Something not discussed in the council chamber. This caught Kellen's attention. What? Our intelligence suggests Crithax is not acting merely on Kravtor authority. He has technology, devices that should not exist in this sector. What kind of technology? His mother's expression grew troubled. We don't know precisely, but reports speak of weapons that affect the mind, that can bend will and loyalty. And Krythax has been meeting with nobles from our allied systems. Nobles who returned. Changed. A chill ran down Kellen's spine. Mind control? That's forbidden technology. Even the Kravtor signed the Neural Sovereignty Accord, which is why this must remain secret until we have proof, she emphasized. Your father has agents investigating, but if Krythax suspects we know, he'll accelerate whatever he's planning, Kellen finished. She nodded. Now you begin to understand the game being played. Your apology tomorrow isn't surrender, it's misdirection. Let Krythax believe we are weak, divided, while we gather evidence of his true intentions. For the first time since the incident in the ceremonial hall, Kellen felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps there was a strategy at work after all. Something beyond mere diplomatic capitulation. What can I do to help? He asked. His mother's eyes studied him, as if weighing his readiness for whatever she might say next. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. For now, play your part, apologize convincingly, then return to your studies and training. She started toward the door, then paused. And perhaps reconnect with some of your old friends. The engineer's daughter from the outer colonies, for instance, the one who's always tinkering with communication devices. Kellen blinked in surprise. Mira, what does she have to do with this? His mother smiled enigmatically. Sometimes the most valuable allies are not found in council chambers or military ranks. With that, she slipped from his room, leaving Kellen with far more questions than answers. But one thing had become clear. There was more happening than a simple diplomatic insult. Something darker lurked beneath the surface, and somehow, his mother believed Mira might help him uncover it. Mira Vex lived in the engineering district of Dampton's capital, a chaotic warren of workshops and laboratories where the Coalition's brightest minds developed technologies that kept the 12 systems functioning. Unlike the pristine corridors of the palace, the district hummed with energy, steam occasionally venting from underground power conduits, the air thick with the scent of ozone and heated metal. Kellen had donned civilian clothing for this visit, a hood pulled low over his features. After his public apology that morning, a humiliating affair during which Krythax had watched with undisguised satisfaction, the last thing he wanted was recognition. He navigated the crowded streets from memory, having snuck out to visit Mira countless times during their childhood. Though their friendship had waned in recent years as his royal responsibilities increased, he still remembered the way to the Vex family workshop. The building looked smaller than he recalled, a 3-story structure crammed between larger facilities, its facade covered in a patchwork of metal plating salvaged from decommissioned starships. A hand-painted sign declared, "Vex Innovations, problems solved, questions answered, miracles negotiable." Kellen smiled despite his dark mood, typical Vex family humor. He approached the entrance, hesitating briefly before pressing the notification panel. A series of lights blinked in response, and seconds later, the door slid open to reveal a petite figure covered in mechanical grease, goggles pushed up into a wild mane of teal-colored hair. Miravex blinked at him in surprise, then broke into a wide grin. Well, well, the prodigal prince returns to the commoners. She wiped her hands on an already filthy cloth. To what do I owe the honor? Wait, don't tell me another royal communicator mysteriously stopped working after you tried to improve it? Kellen couldn't help but laugh. 3 years ago, he'd nearly caused a diplomatic incident by accidentally rewiring his official communicator to broadcast his private conversations to the entire palace. Nothing like that. I just wanted to see a friendly face. Something in his tone must have conveyed his state of mind, because Mira's teasing expression softened. Come in, then. But watch your step, I've got projects in various states of disassembly all over the floor. She wasn't exaggerating. The interior of the workshop was a technological jungle, with components from a dozen different systems scattered across every available surface. Half-completed devices hung from the ceiling, while diagnostic equipment blinked and hummed in the corners. "Your parents around?" Kellen asked, carefully navigating between piles of circuitry. "Off-world," Mira replied, clearing a space on a workbench. "Coalition Science Summit on Taralis Prime. They left me in charge, which either shows tremendous faith in my abilities or a complete lapse in judgment." She offered him a seat on a surprisingly comfortable hover chair. "I saw the broadcast this morning. That apology looked like it physically pained you." Kellen grimaced. "That obvious, huh? To anyone who knows you." She rummaged through a cluttered cabinet and produced 2 containers of carbonated juice. "So what's really going on? You don't visit for nearly a year, then show up the day after you're forced to apologize to the Kravtor General? I'm smart, Kellen, but even I can connect those particular dots." He accepted the drink, trying to decide how much to reveal. His mother had suggested reconnecting with Mira, but had been frustratingly vague about why. "What do you know about neural interface technology?" he asked finally. Mira's eyebrows shot up. "Jumping right into restricted tech conversations, are we? Know how have you been or love what you've done with your hair?" "It's important, Mira." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Fine. Neural interface tech is heavily regulated after the cognitive wars. Basic medical applications are permitted: neural implants for sensory restoration, emergency battlefield medicine, that sort of thing. Military-grade interfaces for enhanced reflexes and tactical uploads exist but require coalition oversight. Anything that influences decision-making or emotional responses is strictly prohibited under the Neural Sovereignty Accord." Kellen nodded. "And what if someone had developed technology that could violate that accord? That could influence minds?" Mira's expression grew serious. "That would be catastrophically dangerous. The accord exists because neural manipulation nearly destroyed civilization during the cognitive wars. Entire populations turned against each other, unable to distinguish between their own thoughts and implanted directives." She leaned forward. "Why are you asking about this?" "I can't say exactly," Kellen replied carefully. "But there's reason to believe someone might be developing or using such technology." "The Kravtor," Mira said, making the connection immediately. "That's why you're here. You think Krythax has access to mind control tech." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She set down her drink. "It makes sense. The increasing defections from coalition worlds, the strange behavior of formerly loyal allies." Her eyes widened. "The Vermilion delegation." "What about them?" Kellen asked. His interest piqued. "They visited last month for the tech exchange. My parents hosted their engineering team." Mira started pacing, a habit when her mind worked faster than she could verbalize. "Their lead engineer, Sorval, has been a family friend for decades. But during this visit he was different, distant. His technical decisions made no sense, and he kept receiving private communications that he wouldn't discuss. Could it have been ordinary security protocols?" Mira shook her head. "Sorval and my father have Security 7 clearance. There's almost nothing they can't discuss with each other. And then there was the device." "What device?" "Something Sorval carried everywhere. About the size of your palm. Silvery metal with pulsing blue lines. He claimed it was a specialized scanner, but it didn't match any known coalition technology." She stopped pacing. "And the day after they left, my father's secure files were accessed files containing plans for Dampton's planetary defense grid." Kellen felt his pulse quicken. "Did you report this?" To whom? The Coalition Security Council is half-staffed with representatives from systems rumored to be considering defection. We didn't know who to trust. She crossed her arms. Is that why you're here? Your family finally noticed something's wrong? My mother suggested I reconnect with you, Kellen admitted. She didn't explain why, but she mentioned your communications expertise might be valuable. Mira's expression shifted from concern to excitement. Queen Aaliyah sent you. That means they're finally taking action. She hurried to a locked cabinet in the corner of the workshop. I've been working on something, a detector for non-standard neural frequencies. She returned with a device that resembled a standard Coalition communicator but with obvious modifications. The neural patterns emit specific energy signatures, she explained. Medical interfaces operate on regulated frequencies, but if someone is using illegal technology, it would broadcast on different frequencies, Kellen finished. Could your device detect those? In theory. She handed him the modified communicator. I've been fine-tuning it, but I need more data. If I could get readings from someone suspected of being influenced, that would be dangerous, Kellen warned. If Krythax discovers what you're doing, he'd probably have me eliminated, Mira acknowledged with surprising calm. But if he's using forbidden technology to undermine the Coalition, the alternative is worse. She reclaimed the device. Besides, I'm not suggesting we confront Krythax directly. We need to start smaller, gather evidence, build a case that even the Security Council can't ignore. Kellen considered her words. This was exactly the kind of concrete action he'd been hoping for, a way to fight back against Krythax that didn't involve diplomatic capitulation or premature military action. I know someone who might help us, he said after a moment's thought. Someone with access to places we can't go, with connections throughout the shadier parts of the 12 systems. Mira raised an eyebrow. You're not talking about Hux, Kellen confirmed. The assassin? Mira looked skeptical. The same Hux who tried to kill your father 3 years ago? Former assassin, Kellen corrected. After his capture, he provided information that helped dismantle 3 separate criminal organizations. My father commuted his sentence in exchange for his services as an informant. And you trust him? Not entirely, Kellen admitted. But he has a code of honor, strange as it may seem. And he despises the Kravtor even more than he once despised the Arrow Songs. Mira sighed. I must be crazy to even consider this. She tucked the modified communicator into a secure pocket of her work clothes. Fine. Let's meet your reformed assassin. But if he tries anything, I'm testing my new sonic disruptor on him. Kellen smiled for the first time since Krythax had spat on his family crest. I'd expect nothing less. As they prepared to leave the workshop, Kellen felt a strange mix of emotions, trepidation about the danger they were courting, anger at Krythax's schemes, but also a surge of purpose that had been missing since the humiliating council meeting. Whatever technology Krythax possessed, whatever his ultimate plans for the Coalition, Kellen was no longer content to wait and watch. With Mira's technical brilliance and Hux's underworld connections, perhaps they could uncover the truth before it was too late. And if that truth implicated Krythax in crimes beyond simple diplomatic insults, well, then Kellen's apology would be the last victory the general ever claimed against House Arrowsong. The lower levels of Dampton's capital city bore little resemblance to either the regal splendor of the palace or the organized chaos of the engineering district. Here, beneath the gleaming spires and aerial thoroughfares, the city's underbelly thrived in perpetual twilight, illuminated by flickering bioluminescent panels and the occasional harsh glare of security spotlights. Kellen and Mira had traded their distinctive clothing for nondescript attire purchased from a street vendor's shapeless gray garments that helped them blend with the diverse crowd of species that populated the lower levels. Even so, Kellen kept his head down, aware that an Arrowsong face would be recognized even here. "Hey, how exactly do we contact your assassin friend?" Mira whispered as they navigated a crowded market square. The air was thick with the scents of exotic foods and questionable chemical compounds, merchants hawking wares of dubious legality from makeshift stalls. "We don't contact him directly," Kellen replied, scanning the various establishments lining the square. "He has a system." His eyes settled on a dingy establishment whose sign displayed a cracked crystal goblet. There, the shattered cup. "A bar?" Mira looked skeptical. "Very original for a clandestine meeting." "It's not just a bar," Kellen said, guiding her toward the entrance. "It's neutral territory. Even coalition security forces respect its sovereignty. No weapons, no arrests, no violence of any kind permitted inside. And people actually follow those rules down here?" "The alternatives are apparently quite persuasive," Kellen replied grimly. The interior of the shattered cup was surprisingly clean, if dimly lit. Various species occupied tables scattered throughout the space, conversations conducted in hushed tones. Behind the long bar, a massive four-armed proprietor polished glassware with methodical precision, all four eyes scanning the room continuously. Kellen approached the bar, waiting until the proprietor's attention turned to him. "What'll it be?" the bartender rumbled, voice like gravel shifting underfoot. "Cerulean sunrise," Kellen replied. "With ice from the shadows." The coded phrase felt awkward on his tongue, but the bartender showed no reaction beyond a slight narrowing of his upper eyes. "Take table 7, he said after a moment. "First round's prepared already." Kellen nodded thanks, then led Mira to the designated table in a shadowy corner. 2 glasses of amber liquid awaited them. "Don't drink it," he murmured as they sat. "It's not really for us." Mira raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her fingers discreetly checking the neural detector in her pocket. They waited in silence for nearly 10 minutes before a slight figure slid into the third chair at their table. The newcomer wore a hooded cloak that obscured most of his features, but Kellen recognized the distinctive silver iris implants that gleamed in the bar's low light. "Prince Arrowsong," Huck said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Slumming with the commoners again?" "Hello, Hux," Kellen replied evenly. "Thank you for meeting us." The former assassin's gaze shifted to Mira. "And you've brought a friend. The Vex girl, if I'm not mistaken. Interesting combination." Mira stiffened. "You know who I am." A thin smile crossed Hux's visible features. "I make it my business to know everyone in the prince's orbit. Potential leverage. You understand. Old habits." "We need your help," Kellen interjected, not wanting the conversation to derail before it began. "Clearly," Hux replied, finally reaching for one of the untouched drinks. "The heir to House Arrowsong doesn't crawl through the lower levels for pleasure, especially after that spectacle of an apology this morning." He took a sip of the amber liquid. "I almost felt sorry for you. Almost." Kellen ignored the jab. "What do you know about General Krythax's recent activities?" Hux's expression sharpened with interest. "Straight to business, then." "Very well." He set down his glass. "Krythax has been busy. Private meetings with officials from at least 4 coalition worlds. Unusual shipments arriving from beyond the Crimson Vale region with no extradition treaties and fewer questions. And rumors of specialized equipment being installed in his compound on Dampton." "What kind of equipment?" Mira asked. Hux studied her briefly before answering. "The kind that requires significant power generation and specialized shielding. The kind that doesn't appear on any official manifest. The kind that makes my contacts nervous enough to triple their usual fees for information. Neural technology, Kellen said quietly. Mind control devices. Hux's silver eyes widened fractionally, the closest thing to surprise he ever displayed. You're better informed than I expected. Princeling. Yes, the rumors suggest neural manipulation tech, though no one's been able to confirm it directly. Those who get too close to Krythax's operation have a habit of either disappearing or suddenly becoming his most devoted supporters. We need proof, Mira said. Hard evidence that he's violating the Neural Sovereignty Accord. Hux laughed softly. And I suppose you want me to waltz into his heavily guarded compound and steal this evidence for you? My debt to your father is considerable, Prince Kellen. But not that considerable. We don't need you to infiltrate his compound. Kellen clarified. We need information on his movements, his contacts here on Dampton, and we need access to someone who's potentially been affected by his technology. For this, Mira added, discreetly showing the edge of her detection device. Hux's eyes narrowed with interest. A neural frequency scanner. Clever. But getting close enough to use it on one of Krythax's puppets won't be easy. His inner circle is well protected. What about the Vermilion delegation? Kellen suggested. Mira says their chief engineer behaved strangely during a recent visit, accessed secure files afterward. Sorval, Hux nodded. Yes, there are whispers about him. He's scheduled to return to Dampton in 3 days for the Coalition Defense Committee meeting. All very hush-hush, but security protocols are filed in advance. Could you get us access to that meeting? Kellen asked. Hux traced the rim of his glass with one finger. Considering, not to the meeting itself, but the delegates will be staying at the Grand Coalition Hotel. I have connections there. Enough to get us close to Sorval? Mira pressed. Possibly, Hux leaned forward. But before I commit to anything, I want to know what's in it for me. My arrangement with your father covers information, not active participation in whatever scheme you're hatching. Kellen had anticipated this question. If we prove Krythax is using illegal neural technology, it won't just be a coalition violation. It will invalidate the diplomatic protections he currently enjoys. Understanding dawned in Hux's silver eyes, making him fair game for justice outside official channels. I didn't say that, Kellen replied carefully. You didn't have to, Princeling, Hux smiled thinly. Very well, I'll arrange access to the hotel. 3 days from now. Service entrance. Midday rotation. The rest is up to you. He stood to leave, then paused. One piece of advice, freely given. Whatever you discover, be prepared for the possibility that the corruption extends further than Krythax alone. Power like neural manipulation technology attracts powerful allies. With that cryptic warning, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Kellen and Mira alone at the table. Charming friend you have there, Mira commented dryly. He's not my friend, Kellen corrected, but he is reliable, in his way. He glanced at the untouched drink before him. We should go. We have 3 days to prepare. As they made their way back toward the upper levels, Kellen's mind raced with possibilities. If they could confirm Krythax was using forbidden technology, it would change everything, not just for House Arrowsong, but for the entire coalition. The general's insult to his family crest now seemed almost insignificant compared to the threat they might be facing. But the fire of vengeance still burned within Kellen, transformed now into something larger, more purposeful. This was no longer just about family honor. It was about protecting the 12 systems from a threat they didn't even know existed. And somehow, the son of House Arrowsong found himself at the center of it all, with only a brilliant engineer and a reformed assassin as allies. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Kellen maintained his regular schedule of training and studies to avoid suspicion, but every free moment was devoted to planning their mission at the Grand Coalition Hotel. Lysandra noticed the change in his demeanor during their daily training sessions. "Your focus has improved," she commented as they completed a particularly complex sequence of movements. "Your anger no longer dominates your form." "I've been reflecting on your teachings," Kellen replied, careful not to reveal too much. He trusted his swordmaster implicitly. But the fewer people who knew about their investigation, the safer everyone would be. "Indeed?" Lysandra seemed skeptical. "And these reflections have nothing to do with your clandestine visit to the engineering district or your unusual interest in the Coalition Defense Committee meeting." Kellen froze mid-movement. "How did you—" "I am responsible for your safety, young prince," she reminded him. "Did you think your excursions would go unnoticed?" He lowered his practice sword, considering his options. Lying to Lysandra was futile. She read him too well, but involving her in what might amount to treason if they were caught. "We believe Krythax is using illegal neural technology," he said finally, keeping his voice low though they were alone in the training arena. "Technology that could explain the recent defections from Coalition worlds, the strange behavior of former allies." Lysandra's expression remained neutral, but Kellen detected a slight tensing of her shoulders. "These are dangerous accusations," she said carefully. "Now, what evidence do you have?" "None yet. That's why He caught himself. "That's what I'm investigating. With the help of Mira Vex and a former assassin." Lysandra finished for him. When Kellen's eyes widened in surprise, she almost smiled. "I am very thorough in my duties. Prince Kellen." He sighed, accepting defeat. "Are you going to stop me?" Lysandra was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes unreadable. Finally, she set aside her own practice weapon and approached him. "When I was captured by Krythax during the Vermilion Moons campaign," she said quietly, "I witnessed things that still haunt my dreams. Experiments conducted on prisoners. Devices that made strong minds break. Loyal hearts turn traitor." She touched the scar on her neck. "This was not merely his mark of victory, as I led you to believe. It was where they attached one of their early prototypes." Kellen stared at her in shock. "You were—" "A test subject, yes. For 13 days before I managed to escape." Her voice remained steady, but Kellen could see the cost of these revelations in the tightness around her eyes. "If Krythax has perfected that technology, no diplomatic accord will stop him from using it. The Aerosong dynasty, the entire coalition, would fall from within." "Then you understand why I must do this," Kellen said. "Why we must find proof." "I understand," Lysandra nodded. "But I will not allow you to face this danger alone. Whatever you have planned, I will accompany you." Kellen started to protest, but Lysandra raised a hand to silence him. "This is not a request, Prince Kellen. Either I join your mission or I inform your father of your activities. Those are your options." He recognized the resolve in her voice. There would be no swaying her. "We move in 2 days," he conceded. "Grand Coalition Hotel, midday. Mira has developed a device that can detect neural frequencies. We need to get close enough to scan one of Krythax's suspected puppets, the Vermilion engineer named Sorval." Lysandra considered this information. "The hotel's security will be formidable during the Defense Committee meeting." "We have help," Kellen assured her. "Access through service areas, temporary credentials." "Your assassin friend," Lysandra nodded. "Very well, but we will need a better plan than simply walking up to Sorval and scanning him. The Vermilion delegates will be guarded. their movements restricted to secure areas. What do you suggest? A faint smile touched Lysandra's lips. As it happens, I served as security liaison for 3 defense committee meetings before becoming your swordmaster. I know the protocols, the schedules, and most importantly, the vulnerabilities. For the first time, Kellen felt a surge of genuine hope. With Lysandra's knowledge of security procedures, Mira's technical expertise, and Hux's underworld connections, they might actually succeed in exposing Krythax's scheme. One condition, Lysandra added, her expression growing serious again. If we find evidence of neural technology, we take it directly to your father. No vigilante justice, no confrontation with Krythax. The stakes are too high for personal vendettas. Kellen wanted to argue but knew she was right. This was bigger than his wounded pride, bigger even than his grandfather's murder. This was about the future of 12 systems and billions of lives. Agreed, he said, extending his hand in a formal gesture. Lysandra clasped his forearm in the traditional warrior's grip. Then let us prepare properly. You may have outgrown many of my lessons, Prince Kellen. But there are still a few tricks this old swordmaster can teach you. As they resumed training with renewed purpose, Kellen felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. In 2 days, they would either uncover the truth that could save the Coalition or find themselves trapped in Krythax's web, with no escape. The Grand Coalition Hotel dominated the skyline of Dampton's diplomatic quarter, its crystalline spires reflecting the planet's 3 moons even in daylight. Built to accommodate dignitaries from across the 12 systems, the hotel was a marvel of security and luxury, with each floor designed to meet the environmental and cultural needs of different species. On the day of the Defense Committee meeting, Kellen found himself in the hotel's vast underground service area, dressed in the gray coveralls of maintenance personnel. Beside him, Mira fidgeted with her neural detector, while Lysandra stood perfectly still, her experienced eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Your friend is late, Lysandra noted, her voice low. Hux operates on his own schedule, Kellen replied, though he too was beginning to worry. Their window of opportunity was narrow. The committee meeting would last only 3 hours, and Sorval would be surrounded by security before and after. Maybe he sold us out, Mira suggested darkly. Decided Krythax's paycheck looked better than your family's protection. Before Kellen could respond, a service door hissed open, revealing a tall, thin Ardelian in supervisor's attire. The being's translucent skin made its internal organs faintly visible, a disturbing sight for those unaccustomed to the species. You're late, the Ardelian said without preamble. Maintenance inspection of the Vermilion Suite starts in 12 minutes. You'll need these. He thrust a handful of access cards toward them. Kellen recognized Hux's voice despite the perfect disguise. Thank you, Supervisor, he said, accepting the cards. Any special instructions? Standard environmental check, Hux replied, maintaining his cover. The Vermilion delegation requested adjustments to the atmospheric composition. You'll need to verify the settings in both the main suite and the adjoining conference room. He handed Kellen a datapad. Full inspection checklist, don't deviate from protocol. Lysandra stepped forward. And security presence? 2 guards at the main entrance, 1 at the private elevator. Internal monitoring is suspended during environmental adjustments due to the specialized equipment. Hux's disguised features formed what might have been a smile. Standard procedure. How convenient, Mira murmured. Indeed. Hux checked a monitoring device on his wrist. The delegation is currently in the primary conference chamber, 3 levels down. Sorval requested private workspace in the suite for technical preparations. He should be alone. He gestured toward a service elevator. That will take you directly to the Vermilion level. You have 30 minutes before the atmospheric adjustment cycle completes. Kellen nodded his understanding. And after the inspection? Return to sub-level 3 for debriefing. Hux turned to leave, then added, I was never here, Princeling. Remember that if things go wrong. With that, he was gone, the service door sealing behind him. Charming to the last, Mira commented. Shall we? They entered the service elevator. Lysandra positioning herself closest to the door, ready to react first if they encountered trouble. As the elevator ascended, Kellen felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced before competitions or important ceremonies. Not quite fear, but heightened awareness of consequence. The detector is ready, Mira whispered, showing him the modified communicator. It needs approximately 15 seconds of proximity to capture a neural signature. If Sorval is being influenced by illegal technology, this will confirm it. And if he catches us scanning him? Kellen asked. Then I suggest we run very fast, Mira replied with forced lightness. Or rely on your swordmaster's legendary skills. Lysandra didn't smile. If confrontation occurs, you two will exit immediately. I will handle any complications. The elevator slowed, then stopped. A soft chime indicated they had reached the Vermilion level. The doors opened to reveal a sumptuously appointed corridor, the walls lined with artwork from across the Coalition. No security personnel were visible, but Kellen knew better than to assume they were unobserved. Standard procedure, he reminded the others, stepping into the corridor with the datapad prominently displayed. We're just maintenance workers performing scheduled tasks. They approached the Vermilion suite, Kellen in the lead. He pressed his access card to the reader beside the ornate door, holding his breath until the panel flashed green and the door slid open. The suite beyond was a study in luxury, with furnishings calibrated to Vermilion physiology slightly larger than human scale, with distinctive ergonomic curves. The air held a faint, spicy scent, characteristic of Vermilion environmental preferences, and seated at a workstation near the panoramic window was Sorval, the Vermilion engineer. His crimson-hued skin contrasted sharply with the white formal attire of his delegation. He looked up as they entered, yellow eyes narrowing slightly. "Maintenance?" he asked, his voice carrying the distinctive melodic quality of Vermilion speech. Kellen nodded, forcing himself to appear casual. "Atmospheric adjustment inspection, sir. Shouldn't take long." Sorval frowned. "I requested adjustments yesterday. The settings are satisfactory now." "Just a verification check, sir," Lysandra interjected smoothly. "Coalition protocol for all diplomatic accommodations. We'll be out of your way shortly." The engineer studied them for a moment longer, then returned his attention to his workstation. "Very well. Proceed." Kellen moved toward the environmental control panel near the suite's entryway, making a show of checking settings while Mira circulated through the room with a standard atmospheric sampling device, the neural detector concealed beneath it. Lysandra positioned herself near the door, ostensibly examining the airflow vents but actually ensuring no one interrupted them. As Mira worked her way closer to Sorval, Kellen watched from the corner of his eye. She needed 15 seconds of close proximity. 14. 13. Sorval suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his ear. "Yes, General," he said, apparently responding to a communication device. "I understand. Immediately." Kellen froze. "General? Could he be speaking to Krythax directly?" The engineer rose abruptly, gathering several data crystals from his workstation. "You must complete your inspection quickly," he announced. "I am needed in the conference chamber." Mira caught Kellen's eye, giving a tiny shake of her head. She hadn't been close enough long enough to get a proper reading. Actually, sir, Kellen improvised, we're detecting an unusual variance in the ion concentration near your workstation. Could you remain seated while we verify the readings? It will only take a moment. Sorval's yellow eyes narrowed. That is not possible. I have direct orders to... He stopped mid-sentence, his gaze suddenly focusing on Kellen with new intensity. You, he said slowly. Your facial structure. House Arrow Song. Kellen's heart sank. The thin disguise of maintenance coveralls wasn't enough to hide his distinctive Arrow Song features from close scrutiny. Sir, I think you're mistaken, he began, but Sorval was already reaching for something beneath his formal attire. Security breach, the Vermilion announced, producing a small communication device. Arrow Song infiltration in progress. Lysandra moved with blinding speed. Before Sorval could activate the device, she was across the room, her hand clamping over his. That won't be necessary, she said calmly. The engineer's free hand shot up, striking at Lysandra with surprising strength. She deflected the blow easily, but in doing so, had to release his other hand. Sorval backed away, raising the communicator to his lips. High security to Vermilion Suite, intruders. Mira acted without hesitation. She aimed her sampling device directly at Sorval and pressed a hidden control. Instead of scanning, the device emitted a targeted electromagnetic pulse that caused the communicator to spark and die in the engineer's hand. What have you done? Sorval demanded, dropping the useless device. Now, Mira, Kellen urged. Scan him while you can. Mira rushed forward, the neural detector now exposed. Sorval tried to evade her, but Lysandra moved to block his retreat, herding him back toward Mira's advancing device. You stand down, Engineer Sorval, Lysandra commanded. We mean you no harm. Lies, Sorval hissed, his normally melodious voice distorted with anger. House Arrow Song seeks to undermine the coalition. The general warned us. The general? Kellen pressed, hoping to keep him talking while Mira maneuvered closer with the scanner. You mean Krythax? What exactly did he warn you about? Something flickered in Sorval's yellow eyes' confusion. Perhaps, or internal conflict. The plot. The Arrow Song betrayal. He shook his head as if trying to clear it. The evidence is irrefutable. What evidence? Kellen demanded. What exactly do you think my family has done? Before Sorval could answer, Mira lunged forward, pressing the neural detector against the back of the engineer's neck. He reacted violently, twisting away, but not before the device emitted a soft tone indicating a successful scan. Got it, Mira exclaimed. Sorval's expression transformed from confusion to rage. You have sealed your fate, he snarled, reaching into his formal attire once more. This time what emerged was not a communicator but a weapon, a small, lethal pulse pistol of Kravtor design, illegal on Dampton, especially in diplomatic quarters. Down! Lysandra shouted, pushing Kellen aside as Sorval fired. The pulse blast scorched the wall where Kellen had been standing moments before. Lysandra moved with practiced precision, closing the distance between herself and Sorval before he could fire again. Her hand struck his wrist, sending the weapon clattering across the floor. The Vermilion engineer was no match for Lysandra in hand-to-hand combat, but he fought with unexpected ferocity, landing a solid blow to her ribs before she subdued him with a precisely targeted strike to a nerve cluster at the base of his skull. Sorval collapsed, unconscious but alive. We need to go, Lysandra said urgently, already moving toward the door. That weapon discharge will trigger automated security protocols. Now we have minutes at most. Kellen helped Mira to her feet. She had dived for cover when the shooting started. Did you get a complete scan? She nodded, clutching the neural detector. Full neural pattern captured, but we need to analyze it somewhere safe. They hurried from the suite, leaving the unconscious Sorval behind. Instead of returning to the main service elevator, Lysandra led them to an emergency stairwell at the end of the corridor. Maintenance tunnels connect to the lower levels, she explained as they descended rapidly. We can bypass the main security checkpoints. The next 20 minutes were a blur of narrow passages, service corridors, and carefully timed movements between security camera sweeps. Lysandra's knowledge of the hotel's layout proved invaluable, guiding them through areas rarely seen by guests or even regular staff. Finally, they emerged in a delivery area at the rear of the massive complex where shipping containers and supply vehicles provided cover for their escape into the crowded streets of the diplomatic quarter. Only when they were safely away from the hotel, merged with the bustling crowds of a commercial district, did Kellen allow himself to breathe normally again. That did not go as planned, Mira observed, still clutching the neural detector like a lifeline. We got what we came for, Kellen reminded her. Now we need to analyze the data. Not here, Lysandra cautioned. By now, Krythax will know something happened. The hotel's security recordings will eventually identify us, diplomatic immunity or not. My workshop is too obvious, Mira said, and it'll be the first place they look for me. Kellen considered their options. The old observatory, he decided. In the marshlands outside the city. It's been abandoned since the new astronomical center was built, but the equipment should still be functional enough for your needs. Mira nodded. I can work with that, but we'll need transportation that can't be traced back to any of us. Leave that to me, Lysandra said. I have contacts from my days before royal service. Meet me at the Eastern Market in 1 hour, the spice merchant's stall near the fountain. As they separated to avoid traveling as a group, Kellen found himself replaying the confrontation with Sorval in his mind. The engineer's words echoed troublingly. The Arrow Song betrayal. The evidence is irrefutable. What exactly did Krythax want the coalition to believe about House Arrow Song? And how many others had already been convinced by whatever neural manipulation the general was employing? The consequences were potentially catastrophic, not just for his family, but for the stability of all 12 systems. With each step toward the Eastern Market, Kellen felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier, the stakes rising higher. Whatever Mira discovered in Sorval's neural scan, one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Time was running out. The abandoned observatory rose from the marshlands like a relic from another era, its once gleaming dome now dulled by years of neglect. Located 20 miles from the capital, the facility had been rendered obsolete by newer, more advanced astronomical centers built closer to the city. Now it stood alone, surrounded by the misty swamps that gave Dampton its name. Lysandra had procured an unmarked hover transport, a rugged utilitarian vehicle designed for the challenging terrain of the marshlands. The journey had been tense, with all three vigilant for signs of pursuit. But they had reached the observatory without incident, suggesting their escape from the hotel had gone undetected, at least for now. The interior of the observatory was musty but intact, protected from the elements by automated environmental systems that continued to function despite the facility's abandonment. The main chamber housed the massive telescope apparatus, while adjoining rooms contained data processing equipment and living quarters for researchers who once spent weeks at a time studying Dampton's unique astronomical phenomena. Mira had immediately commandeered the data processing center, connecting her neural detector to the observatory's more powerful systems. For the past hour, she had been analyzing the scan taken from Sorval, her expression growing increasingly troubled as the data revealed its secrets. It's worse than we thought, she announced finally, looking up from the display. Much worse. Kellen and Lysandra moved closer, examining the complex patterns displayed across the ancient but functional screens. Is it neural manipulation technology? Kellen asked. Mira nodded grimly. The most sophisticated I've ever seen, not that there's much to compare it to, given how strictly such technology is controlled. Sorval's neural patterns show clear signs of external influence, primarily in regions associated with loyalty, trust, and decision-making. Can you determine the source? Lysandra asked, her scarred neck seeming to draw her attention unconsciously as she studied the display. Not specifically, Mira replied, but the signature matches theoretical models of prescribed Kravtor technology, the kind banned after the cognitive wars. She highlighted a particular pattern sequence. This is the interesting part. The influence isn't continuous when it appears to be triggered by specific stimuli, certain words, images, perhaps even thoughts. A sleeper protocol, Lysandra murmured, activated only when needed. Exactly, Mira agreed. Which means the subject can appear completely normal most of the time. Only when the trigger is activated does the implanted directive take precedence. Kellen paced the small room, trying to process the implications. So Krythax could have agents throughout the Coalition, people who don't even realize they've been compromised until a specific trigger activates their programming. And based on Sorval's reaction when he recognized you, Lysandra added, it seems likely that House Arrowsong itself may be one such trigger. But why? Kellen demanded. What's Krythax's endgame? If he wants to destroy the Coalition, why not just trigger all his sleeper agents at once? Mira frowned at the data display. These neural patterns suggest something more insidious than simple destruction. The modifications are subtle, targeted specifically at trust and perception. It's almost as if he's building a case, Lysandra finished for her. Not destroying the Coalition, but reshaping it with House Arrowsong as the scapegoat. The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Kellen. The Arrowsong betrayal, he quoted from Sorval's outburst. That's what this is about. He's manipulating key figures across the 12 systems to believe my family has betrayed the Coalition. A coup, Lysandra said flatly. Remove House Arrowsong from power. Replace it with leadership more amenable to Kravtor influence. We need to warn my father, Kellen said urgently. If Krythax has compromised enough officials, they could vote to remove our governing authority, perhaps even bring formal charges against the royal family. That won't be easy, Mira cautioned, gesturing to a small communication console she had activated. Look, emergency broadcasts from the capital. The Vermilion delegation has formally accused House Arrowsong of espionage and attempted assassination. They claim Prince Kellen and unknown accomplices attacked Engineer Sorval in his hotel suite. Kellen felt the blood drain from his face as the recorded announcement played. The Vermilion ambassador, his crimson features solemn, described a cowardly attack and clear evidence of Arrowsong treachery. The Coalition Security Council was convening an emergency session to address the grave threat to interstellar peace. It's happening already, he whispered. Krythax is making his move. We need more than just Sorval's neural scan, Lysandra said, her tactical mind already working on solutions. We need proof of the wider conspiracy, evidence that Krythax is behind the neural manipulation. The device? Mira suggested. Sorval carried a device that my father suspected was non-standard technology. If we could find it, examine it. Krythax would keep the control technology close, Lysandra mused. Not in the hotel, not where Coalition security might accidentally discover it. His compound, Kellen realized. The one Hux mentioned, where unusual equipment was being installed. He turned to Lysandra. Where on Dampton would a Kravtor general establish his personal headquarters? The Swordmaster's expression darkened. There's only one place with enough isolation and strategic value, the Desert of Sorrows. On the far side of the planet. It's technically neutral territory under the Treaty of Vermilion. Neither Arrowsong nor Kravtor. The perfect location for operations that can't bear scrutiny. The desert? Mira looked alarmed. That's hundreds of miles from here, across the most inhospitable terrain on Dampton. And we have no way to get there undetected. Kellen added, every spaceport, every transit hub will be watching for us now. A contemplative silence fell over the group, each searching for a solution that didn't seem to exist. Then Lysandra straightened, her eyes taking on a determined gleam. There is a way, she said slowly, but it's dangerous and it requires trust. What do you mean? Kellen asked. The Midnight Sanctum, she replied. A society of displaced individuals, people who have fallen through the cracks of coalition authority, who exist in the shadows between official jurisdictions. Criminals, Mira translated. Some, Lysandra acknowledged. But also political refugees, escaped prisoners of conscience, those who found coalition justice insufficient. They maintain a network across Dampton, including transportation that operates outside official channels. Kellen studied his swordmaster with new curiosity. And you know how to contact this Midnight Sanctum? I was once counted among their number, she admitted. After my escape from Krythax before I found sanctuary with House Arrowsong, this revelation added yet another layer to Lysandra's mysterious past. Kellen had always known there were chapters of her life she kept private, but he hadn't imagined anything like this. Can they get us to the Desert of Sorrows? He asked. They can, she confirmed. But their help comes at a price, and I don't mean money. The Sanctum deals in favors, in obligations. If we seek their assistance, we will owe them a debt to be collected at their discretion. What kind of debt? Mira asked warily. That's the risk, Lysandra replied. They name the price after the service is rendered, and refusal is not an option. Kellen considered the implications. Binding himself to an obligation to an underground society was not a decision to be made lightly, especially as heir to House Arrowsong. But with his family under threat, with the entire coalition possibly compromised by Krythax's neural technology, what choice did they have? How quickly can you contact them? He asked. Lysandra raised an eyebrow. You're certain? No, he admitted. But we're out of alternatives. Every minute we delay gives Krythax more time to consolidate his position. If the Midnight Sanctum can get us to his desert compound, the risk is worth taking. Lysandra nodded once. Decision made. There's a marshland village 2 miles south of here. I can make contact from there. She turned to Mira. Keep analyzing the neural patterns. Any additional information you can extract might prove valuable. What about me? Kellen asked. Rest while you can, Lysandra advised. Once we reach the desert, there will be little opportunity for recovery. She moved toward the exit, then paused. And Kellen, if I don't return within 3 hours, take Mira and go to your father. Tell him everything. Promise me. The gravity in her voice was unmistakable. Whatever risk she was taking by contacting her former associates, it was significant. I promise, Kellen said solemnly, but you will return. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Such certainty. You've grown, young prince. With that, she disappeared into the misty marshlands surrounding the observatory. Left alone with Mira, Kellen found rest impossible. Instead, he paced the observatory, his mind racing through scenarios, strategies, possibilities. Occasionally, he would stop to watch Mira work, her fingers dancing across the ancient equipment as she extracted every possible byte of information from Sorval's neural scan. Anything new? he asked after nearly an hour had passed. Mira rubbed her eyes wearily. Maybe. I've isolated what appears to be a command protocol embedded in the neural pattern. It's complex, but there seems to be a hierarchical structure to the implanted directives. Meaning? In meaning, some commands take precedence over others. She highlighted a particular pattern sequence. This primary directive overrides all others. It appears to activate only in the presence of a specific frequency, likely emitted by whatever device Krythax controls. A kill switch, Kellen surmised, or perhaps a mass activation trigger for all his sleeper agents. Mira nodded grimly. Which means whatever Krythax is planning, he can implement it instantly across multiple systems simultaneously. No warning, no defense. The implications were staggering. If enough key officials had been compromised, Krythax could effectively seize control of the entire coalition with the press of a button. Can you create a countermeasure? Kellen asked. Something to block or neutralize the trigger signal? Mira considered this. Theoretically, yes. But I'd need to know the exact frequency and modulation pattern of the trigger signal. For that, we'd need access to the source device itself. Another reason to reach Krythax's compound. Kellen concluded. He glanced at the observatory's chronometer. Lysandra had been gone for nearly 2 hours now. The knot of worry in his stomach tightened. Just as he was contemplating whether to prepare for the worst, the main door hissed open. Lysandra entered, looking wearier than when she'd left but otherwise unharmed. It's arranged, she announced without preamble. Transport to the desert, arrival within 5 miles of Krythax's compound. We leave in 20 minutes. How? Mira asked, already beginning to pack up her equipment. It better you don't know the details, Lysandra replied. Suffice to say, it involves routes not on any official map and technology not sanctioned by coalition authorities. And the price? Kellen inquired, remembering her warning about the Sanctum system of favors. To be determined, she said simply. But they've agreed to my condition that any debt incurred be mine alone, not extended to either of you. Kellen frowned. That wasn't our agreement. I won't let you shoulder this burden alone. It's not negotiable, Lysandra stated firmly. My decision, my responsibility. Her expression softened slightly. Consider it part of my duty as your swordmaster and protector. Before Kellen could argue further, a low rumbling sound penetrated the observatory walls. It grew louder, accompanied by a rush of wind that rattled the ancient structure. Our transport has arrived, Lysandra announced. Gather only what's essential when we move now. Mira hurriedly disconnected her equipment, securing the neural detector and its precious data. Kellen had little to gather, only the ceremonial blade he had managed to conceal during their hotel infiltration, now strapped securely at his side. They emerged from the observatory into the misty marshland to find an extraordinary sight awaiting them. Hovering 20 feet above the boggy ground was a vessel unlike any Kellen had seen before, sleek, dark, with an unusual configuration that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Shadow skimmer, Lysandra explained as they approached. Stealth technology, undetectable by standard coalition sensors, banned in all civilized systems. A hatch opened in the vessel's underside, extending a narrow boarding ramp. No pilot was visible, no greeting offered. They're not much for conversation, Lysandra noted dryly. Once aboard, speak only when necessary, and make no attempt to observe the pilot's identity or the vessel's internal systems. Those are the terms. With these ominous instructions, they ascended the ramp into the shadow skimmer's dimly lit interior. The cabin was utilitarian, with 6 narrow seats arranged along the walls and minimal instrumentation visible. As promised, the pilot's compartment was separated by an opaque barrier, offering no glimpse of whoever controlled their fate. The hatch sealed behind them with a pneumatic hiss, and immediately the vessel began to move, accelerating with surprising smoothness despite its obvious power. Through small viewports, Kellen watched the marshlands blur beneath them as the shadow skimmer gained altitude and speed. "How long to the desert?" he asked Lysandra, keeping his voice low. "Approximately 2 hours," she replied. "The vessel will follow ravines and canyon systems to avoid population centers and monitoring stations." "And when we arrive?" Mira questioned, clutching her equipment protectively. "We'll be on our own," Lysandra said. "The sanctum provides transport only. Infiltration of Krythax's compound, extraction of evidence, escape, those challenges remain ours to solve." Kellen leaned back in his seat, trying to organize his thoughts. In just a few days, his life had transformed completely. From the humiliation of apologizing to Krythax in the ceremonial hall, he now found himself aboard an illegal stealth vessel, racing toward a confrontation that could determine the fate of 12 systems and billions of lives. And somewhere in the Desert of Sorrows, General Krythax awaited, perhaps unaware of their approach, perhaps anticipating it. Either way, Kellen knew that before this day ended, he would face the alien who had spat upon his family crest, who had murdered his grandfather, who now threatened everything the Arrowsong dynasty had built over generations. His hand rested on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. No longer a symbol of pomp and tradition, it would soon serve its true purpose as an instrument of justice. Not vengeance, he reminded himself, recalling Lysandra's wisdom. Justice. The distinction would be tested soon enough in the unforgiving sands of the Desert of Sorrows. The Desert of Sorrows earned its name not just from the harsh, lifeless landscape, but from its history as a battleground during the early conflicts between Dampton's indigenous species. Ancient bones still surfaced during the violent sandstorms that scoured the region, grim reminders of wars fought long before humans or Kravtor set foot on the planet. The shadow skimmer descended through swirling clouds of ochre dust, its stealth systems operating at maximum capacity to avoid detection by the perimeter sensors that undoubtedly surrounded Krythax's compound. Through the viewports, Kellen could see nothing but an endless expanse of rusty dunes and jagged rock formations, stretching to the horizon under Dampton's harsh orange sun. "Final approach," Lysandra announced, relaying information from their unseen pilot. "We'll be grounded in the Canyon of Whispers, approximately 5 miles from the target. The vessel departs immediately upon disembarkation." 5 miles through that? Mira gestured toward the hostile terrain visible through the viewport. "In this heat?" "The canyon system provides both cover and a navigable route," Lysandra explained. "And I've secured necessary equipment from our benefactors." The shadow skimmer executed a final descent into a narrow ravine, its walls rising hundreds of feet on either side, creating perpetual shadow at the bottom. With barely a sound, the vessel settled onto the sandy floor of the canyon, its landing struts adjusting to the uneven terrain. The hatch opened, and hot, dry air rushed into the cabin, carrying the scent of sun-baked stone and mineral deposits. Waiting at the base of the ramp were 3 bundles of equipment and environmental suits specifically designed for desert conditions. Compact water purifiers and what appeared to be weapons. "No time for lengthy farewells," Lysandra said, already moving toward the exit. "The vessel must clear the area before detection becomes likely." They descended quickly, gathering the provided equipment. The moment they were clear, the shadow skimmer's hatch closed and the vessel rose silently, accelerating along the canyon before disappearing around a bend in the ravine. "Put these on," Lysandra instructed, distributing the environmental suits. "They'll regulate your body temperature and filter the worst of the dust." The suits were lightweight but durable, with built-in respiration systems and polarized face shields to protect against the harsh sunlight. Once fully equipped, Kellen felt immediately more comfortable despite the oppressive heat that penetrated even the suit's cooling systems. Lysandra handed each of them a weapon not standard coalition issue, but lethal-looking pulse rifles of unfamiliar design. Krav Tor manufacture, she explained, seeing Kellen's questioning look. If we're discovered, better to have weapons that might be mistaken for internal conflict rather than outside infiltration. Mira examined her rifle with obvious discomfort. I've never used one of these. Point and press, Lysandra said simply. The targeting system is semi-autonomous, but let's hope it doesn't come to that. She activated a holographic map projected from her suit's wrist unit. The compound is here, built into the cliff face at the canyon's terminus. Our approach will follow this route, utilizing natural cover wherever possible. The map showed a winding path through the canyon system, occasionally branching into narrower fissures where the ravine walls nearly met overhead. According to Lysandra's information, Krythax's compound was a significant installation. Partially exposed on the cliff face but extending deep into the rock itself, a perfect location for activities meant to remain hidden from coalition oversight. What about security systems? Kellen asked as they began their trek through the canyon. Conventional perimeter sensors, aerial surveillance drones, and, of course, armed patrols. Lysandra replied, but the canyon itself provides a blind spot too narrow for effective drone coverage, too treacherous for regular patrols. How do you know so much about the compound? Mira questioned, struggling slightly with her equipment as they navigated the uneven terrain. Lysandra was silent for a moment before answering. Because I helped design its security systems during my time as Krythax's guest. The revelation hung in the air between them as they continued their arduous journey. Kellen had known pieces of Lysandra's history with Krythax, but each new detail painted an increasingly complex picture of his swordmaster's past. You were more than just a prisoner, he observed quietly. I was many things, she acknowledged, her voice neutral. Prisoner, test subject, eventually a trusted advisor on security protocols. Krythax believed he had broken me, remade me in his image. That misconception allowed me to escape, eventually. And now you're using that knowledge against him, Mira noted. Poetic justice, Lysandra agreed with a grim smile. Though much will have changed since my time there, we should expect new systems, additional safeguards. But the fundamental architecture, the physical layout, the blind spots, the procedural weaknesses, those tend to persist. They fell into silence after that, conserving energy as they made their way deeper into the canyon system. The journey was grueling despite their environmental suits. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous, requiring careful navigation of rockfalls and narrow passages. Occasionally they would freeze in place as a surveillance drone passed high overhead, its sensors sweeping the broader canyon but unable to penetrate the narrower fissures they used for cover. Nearly 3 hours after their landing, Lysandra raised a hand, signaling them to halt. They had reached a point where the canyon widened dramatically, opening into a vast basin surrounded by towering cliffs. Built into the largest of these cliff faces, partly natural and partly constructed, was Krythax's compound. From their vantage point in the shadows of a narrow side canyon, they could observe the installation without being detected. Its main features were immediately apparent landing pads for small spacecraft, defensive turrets positioned at strategic intervals, and multiple entrance points carved into the living rock. Guards in Kravtor military attire patrolled the perimeter, their scaled forms easily distinguishable even at a distance. More extensive than I remember, Lysandra murmured, studying the compound through enhanced optics built into her face shield. Additional levels, expanded defensive capabilities. How do we get in? Kellen asked, the enormity of their task becoming increasingly apparent. Lysandra indicated a point near the base of the cliff. Maintenance access, used for waste disposal and environmental system servicing. Minimal security compared to the main entrances, as it leads to lower priority areas. And once inside? Mira questioned. We find the control center, Lysandra replied. If Krythax is using neural manipulation technology on a large scale, the primary transmission equipment would be housed in a central secure location. Based on the compound's configuration, that would likely be here. She indicated a section deep within the cliff face. That's a lot of ground to cover, Kellen observed. A lot of opportunities to be discovered, which is why we wait until nightfall. Lysandra decided. Kravtor visual acuity decreases significantly in low light conditions. Their patrols will be more heavily reliant on technology rather than natural senses, creating exploitable patterns. With their approach decided, they retreated deeper into the side canyon to rest and prepare. Mira took the opportunity to review the data from Sorval's neural scan once more, searching for any additional insights that might help them identify the control technology once inside. Kellen found himself oddly calm as the hours passed, the suns of Dampton gradually sinking toward the horizon. The anger and humiliation that had driven him initially had transformed into something more focused, more purposeful. This was no longer about personal vengeance against Krythax for insulting his family crest. This was about protecting billions of lives across 12 systems from a threat they didn't even know existed. As darkness fell over the desert of sorrows, Lysandra distributed small devices to each of them. Subdermal communicators, she explained. Press against your throat to activate, subvocalize to communicate. Range is limited but sufficient for our purposes. Where did you get these? Mira asked, examining the device with professional curiosity. Part of the Sanctum's equipment package, Lysandra replied. The less you know about their origins, the better. She checked her weapons one final time. Remember the plan. Maintenance access. Locate the control center. Gather evidence of the neural technology. Then extraction along the same route. No heroics. No confrontations unless absolutely necessary. Kellen nodded, though something within him wondered if such a clean operation was truly possible. Somewhere in that compound was the alien who had murdered his grandfather, threatened his family's legacy, and potentially compromised the entire coalition with forbidden technology. Could he really just gather evidence and leave, without facing Krythax directly, as if reading his thoughts? Lysandra placed a hand on his shoulder. Justice, not vengeance, she reminded him quietly. Evidence that exposes Krythax to the 12 systems will destroy him far more completely than any confrontation could. I understand, Kellen assured her, though the fire inside him had not entirely cooled. With final checks complete, they moved out from their hiding place, using the deepening shadows to approach the compound's perimeter. The maintenance access point Lysandra had identified was a reinforced door set into the base of the cliff, partially concealed by accumulated sand and debris evidence that it was indeed infrequently used. A simple security panel controlled access, its design significantly less sophisticated than those visible at the main entrances. Standard Kravtor military protocol, Lysandra murmured, examining the panel. Unchanged since my time, apparently. She produced a small device from her equipment and attached it to the panel. After several tense seconds, the indicator lights shifted from red to green, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. We're in, she confirmed, retrieving her bypass device. Stay close, move only when I signal, and be prepared to retreat immediately if discovered. They entered a narrow utility corridor, dimly lit by emergency strips along the floor. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of mechanical systems and recycled atmosphere. Unlike the grand ceremonial spaces of the Aerosong Palace, this was purely functional. Conduits and piping ran along the ceiling, labeled in the angular script of the Krav-Tor language. Lysandra led them with confidence born of familiarity, navigating the service passages as if she had walked them yesterday rather than years ago. Occasionally they would pause, pressing themselves into recesses or behind equipment as patrols passed nearby or maintenance crews moved through intersecting corridors. Their progress was slow but steady, gradually working their way deeper into the compound, ascending through access ladders and narrow stairwells to reach the higher levels where, according to Lysandra, the command centers were located. After nearly an hour of careful infiltration, they reached a security checkpoint more substantial than any they had encountered thus far. A reinforced doorway with multiple scanning systems and a guard station currently occupied by 2 Krav-Tor soldiers. "And this is it," Lysandra whispered through the subdermal communicator. "Beyond this point are the primary command levels. The neural control technology, if it exists, would be housed there." "How do we get past the guards?" Kellen asked, observing the checkpoint from their position in a maintenance alcove. Lysandra studied the situation, then indicated a junction box near the ceiling. "Environmental controls. If we can trigger a malfunction, perhaps a coolant leak, it might draw the guards away from their post temporarily." Mira examined the junction box through her face shield's enhanced optics. "I can reroute the coolant flow, create a minor leak in a section farther down the corridor. Nothing dangerous, but enough to require investigation." "Do it," Lysandra instructed, with careful precision. Mira accessed the junction box, her fingers working deftly despite the unfamiliar technology. After several minutes of delicate adjustments, she gave a satisfied nod. "I done. Coolant pressure is building in section 12B. Leak should manifest in approximately 30 seconds. They waited in tense silence, right on schedule. An alarm began to sound, not the blaring security alert they had feared, but a more measured warning tone indicating a system malfunction. The guards at the checkpoint responded immediately, one remaining at the station while the other moved to investigate the reported leak. "One guard is still too many," Kellen observed. "Perhaps," Lysandra acknowledged, "but predictable. Watch." As they observed, the remaining guard received a communication through his headset. After a brief exchange, he too left his post, moving in the direction his companion had taken. "Standard procedure," Lysandra explained. "Environmental malfunctions near secure areas require multiple responders to ensure they're not diversionary tactics. Which, of course, this one is." "How long do we have?" Kellen asked as they moved swiftly toward the now unguarded checkpoint. 3 minutes, perhaps 4, before they determine the leak is minor and return to their post. Lysandra approached the security panel controlling the reinforced door, applying her bypass device once more. This time, however, the system proved more resistant. "Enhanced security," she muttered, adjusting her approach. "New protocols since my time here." Precious seconds ticked by as she worked. Kellen found himself holding his breath, acutely aware of how exposed they were in the main corridor. Finally, the panel yielded, its lights shifting to green. The reinforced door slid open, revealing a short corridor leading to what appeared to be a central command hub. "Quickly," Lysandra urged, already moving through the doorway. "We need to be clear of this area before the guards return." They hurried through the door, which sealed automatically behind them. The command hub beyond was surprisingly empty, workstations arranged in concentric circles around a central platform, but no personnel present. "Where is everyone?" Mira wondered aloud. "Shift change, perhaps," Lysandra suggested, though she too seemed puzzled by the lack of staff in such a critical area. Kellen moved toward the central platform, where holographic displays projected complex data streams and system statuses. Among these was a three-dimensional representation of what appeared to be Dampton itself, with numerous points of light scattered across its surface. "What is this?" he asked on studying the display. Mira joined him, her technical expertise allowing her to interpret the data more effectively. "It's a network map," she realized, her voice tightening with concern. "Those points of light, they're signal receivers, hundreds of them, concentrated in population centers but spread across the entire planet." "The neural implant network," Kellen surmised. "This must be the control center for Krythax's manipulation technology." Lysandra was already accessing a nearby workstation, her familiarity with Kravtor systems evident in her efficient movements. "Security protocols unchanged," she noted with grim satisfaction. "Overconfidence has always been Krythax's weakness." Data streams began flowing across her display as she bypassed the authentication requirements. Deployment records, activation protocols, subject listings, it's all here. Every compromised official, every implanted directive, every planned activation. "Download everything," Kellen instructed. "This is exactly the evidence we need." Mira had moved to another workstation, her attention caught by a different set of data. "This is strange," she said, examining the display. "According to these power allocation logs, there's an enormous surge scheduled for tonight, less than an hour from now." "What kind of surge?" Lysandra asked sharply. "The system is diverting maximum power to the neural transmission network." Mira replied, her voice growing increasingly concerned as she interpreted the data. "It looks like a mass activation protocol, all implanted subjects, simultaneously, across the entire planet." "The coup," Kellen realized. "Krythax is making his move tonight. He's going to activate every compromised official at once, turn them all against House Arrowsong in a coordinated action." "Worse than that," Lysandra said grimly, having accessed additional files. "The mass activation includes a secondary protocol, neural degradation. Once activated, the implants will begin destroying the host's neural tissue. Within hours, every affected subject will be dead." "He's eliminating his puppets," Kellen whispered in horror. "Erasing the evidence of his manipulation by killing everyone he's influenced. And with key officials across all 12 systems suddenly deceased, the resulting chaos would create the perfect opportunity for a Kravtor power grab." Lysandra concluded. "With House Arrowsong implicated in their deaths, the remaining coalition worlds would turn to Krythax as the only viable alternative for leadership." "We need to stop this," Kellen declared, the enormity of what they had discovered overwhelming any thought of merely gathering evidence and retreating. "Can we disable the transmission network from here?" Mira studied the system architecture displayed before her. "Possibly, but it would require administrative access we don't have, and any attempt to brute force those permissions would trigger security protocols. There must be a primary control device," Lysandra reasoned. "Something that initiates the mass activation." Here. Mira indicated a reference in the system logs. "The activation sequence requires a physical authentication device, something called the command key. Without it, the system cannot execute the mass protocol." "Where would this command key be kept?" Kellen asked. Lysandra's expression darkened. "With Krythax himself, he never entrusts critical technology to subordinates, not after my escape taught him the danger of delegation." The implications were clear. Stopping the activation would require more than just accessing the control center. It would require confronting General Krythax directly and seizing the command key before he could initiate the mass protocol. "How long until the scheduled activation?" Kellen asked, his decision already forming. By 53 minutes, Mira confirmed, checking the system clock. Where would Krythax be? Where would the activation take place? Lysandra accessed the compound's internal security systems, bringing up a schematic of the installation. Here, she indicated a chamber deeper within the compound, several levels above their current position. The primary transmission chamber, maximum power, direct access to the planetary relay network. Kellen studied the schematic, committing the route to memory. Download everything you can from these systems, he instructed Mira. Then you and Lysandra get that data back to my father. Use the same route we came in. And you? Lysandra asked, though her tone suggested she already knew his answer. I'm going after Krythax, Kellen stated simply. I'm going to stop the activation. Alone? Mira looked aghast. That's suicide. Krythax is a veteran warrior with decades of combat experience. You can't face him one-on-one. I won't be fighting him, Kellen assured her. Just delaying him, creating a distraction while you escape with the evidence. Once that data reaches my father, Krythax is finished regardless of what happens here. Lysandra studied him intently, seeing beyond his words to the determination beneath. You've been waiting for this moment since he spat on your family crest, she observed. The chance to confront him directly. Kellen couldn't deny it. This isn't about vengeance anymore, he insisted. It's about stopping a massacre. Billions of lives are at stake. Both can be true, Lysandra said quietly. Then, to his surprise, she unfastened a small device from her belt and handed it to him. Sonic disruptor. It won't penetrate Kravtor scales, but aimed at the eyes or auditory organs. It can temporarily incapacitate. Kellen accepted the device, recognizing it for what it was, Lysandra's acknowledgement that she wouldn't be able to dissuade him from this course. Thank you, he said simply. I'm coming with you, she declared, her tone brooking no argument. Mira can return with the data. She knows the way we came, and she has the technical skills to ensure the evidence reaches the right hands. But Kellen began to protest. I am your sword master. Lysandra cut him off. My duty is to protect you, to fight at your side. That doesn't change because we're in Krythax's compound rather than the training arena. The truth of her words was undeniable. And pragmatically, Kellen knew his chances against Krythax improved dramatically with Lysandra at his side. All right, he conceded, and together then. Mira looked between them, concern evident in her expression. This is crazy, she muttered, but continued downloading data from the system. What's our rendezvous point if when you succeed? The canyon where we were dropped. Lysandra decided, if we're not there within 6 hours of your arrival, don't wait. Get the data to the Crown Prince at any cost. Mira nodded grimly, completing her download and securing the precious data module in a protected pocket of her environmental suit. Ready? She confirmed. Take this. Lysandra handed her a small device. Emergency beacon. Once you're clear of the compound's sensor range, activate it. The Sanctum monitors these frequencies. They'll extract you if necessary. With final instructions exchanged, they prepared to separate. Mira would return the way they had come, while Kellen and Lysandra would ascend to the transmission chamber where Krythax awaited. As they parted at the command hub's exit, Mira caught Kellen's arm. Don't die, she said simply, her usual technical precision giving way to emotional directness. I've still got at least 6 prototype communicators you promised to test. Kellen managed a smile despite the gravity of their situation. I wouldn't dream of disappointing you, he assured her. See you in the canyon. With that, they separated, Mira heading back toward the maintenance access point, while Kellen and Lysandra moved deeper into the heart of Krythax's domain. The route to the transmission chamber took them through increasingly secure areas of the compound. Lysandra's knowledge of Kravtor security protocols proved invaluable, allowing them to bypass checkpoints and avoid patrols with methodical precision. When confrontation couldn't be avoided, they moved with coordinated efficiency. Lysandra disabling guards with practiced martial techniques while Kellen secured their weapons and communication devices. As they ascended through the levels, the architecture changed subtly. The utilitarian design of the lower compound gave way to more elaborate spaces, with distinctive Kravtor aesthetic elements, angular motifs, ceremonial alcoves housing ancient weapons, wall panels inscribed with the histories of clan victories. They were entering Krythax's personal domain, Lysandra explained in a whisper as they paused in a shadowed corridor. These levels are restricted to his most trusted lieutenants and personal guard. How much farther to the transmission chamber? Kellen asked, checking the time on his suit's display. 38 minutes remained until the scheduled activation. 2 more levels, Lysandra replied, but security will increase exponentially from here. The direct approach may no longer be viable. She studied a schematic displayed on her wrist unit, then indicated an access panel near the floor. Thermal regulation conduit runs directly above the corridor leading to the transmission chamber antechamber. Kellen eyed the narrow opening skeptically. Will we fit? Barely, Lysandra acknowledged. And it won't be comfortable, but it bypasses 3 security checkpoints we'd otherwise have to confront directly. With no better alternative, they proceeded to remove the access panel and squeeze into the confined space beyond. The conduit was indeed restrictive, barely wide enough for Kellen's shoulders, forcing them to crawl rather than walk. The temperature was uncomfortably warm, despite their environmental suit's cooling system struggling to compensate. They proceeded in silence, each lost in their own thoughts as they navigated the cramped passage. Kellen found his mind returning to the ceremonial hall where this journey had begun, the moment when Krythax had desecrated his family crest. The rage that had coursed through him, the blade that had nearly found the general's throat. How different things might have been if Lysandra hadn't stopped him that day. A diplomatic incident, perhaps war, but not the insidious plot they had uncovered. The neural manipulation that threatened to reshape the entire coalition from within, after what seemed an eternity in the confined space. Lysandra halted. We're here, she whispered, indicating another access panel ahead. This opens into a maintenance alcove near the antechamber. She carefully removed the panel and peered into the space beyond before signaling that it was clear. They emerged from the conduit with relief, taking a moment to stretch cramped limbs and reorient themselves. The alcove was little more than a recessed area containing environmental control equipment, but it offered a vantage point from which they could observe the corridor leading to the transmission chamber. 2 guards stood at attention outside a massive door constructed of some dark, almost light-absorbing material. Kravtor ceremonial guards, distinguishable by their ornate armor and ritualistic weapons. The transmission chamber lies beyond that door, Lysandra confirmed. Krythax will be inside, preparing for the activation. How do we get past the guards? Kellen asked, studying their imposing forms. Unlike the regular soldiers they had encountered thus far, these were elite warriors, their scales bearing the distinctive patterns that marked veterans of multiple campaigns. Lysandra considered the problem. Frontal assault would be suicide. We need a diversion. She examined the maintenance alcove, her attention settling on the environmental control panel. These systems regulate atmosphere and temperature for this entire level, she noted. If we created a sudden pressure drop in an adjacent section, the emergency protocols would require investigation. Kellen finished the thought. Exactly. but not by the ceremonial guards. They never leave their posts except by direct order from Krythax himself. However, it would draw additional security personnel to the affected area, thinning their presence elsewhere. Mira would have been better suited to manipulating the environmental systems. But Lysandra's time in the compound had given her sufficient familiarity to make the necessary adjustments. After several minutes of careful work, she nodded in satisfaction. I pressure drop initiating in Section 7, 30 seconds from now. When the alert sounds, we move not toward the transmission chamber directly, but toward the secondary access corridor. Kellen followed her gaze to a less prominent passage branching off from the main corridor. Where does that lead? Krythax's private chambers, Lysandra replied. Connected to the transmission chamber by an executive access way, his personal escape route if needed. Significantly less guarded than the main entrance. True to Lysandra's prediction. An alert began to sound moments later, a pulsing tone accompanied by amber warning lights. Almost immediately, the sound of running footsteps echoed from an adjacent corridor as security personnel responded to the apparent emergency. The ceremonial guards remained at their posts, impassive despite the commotion, their attention focused on the main approach to the transmission chamber. Now, Lysandra whispered, leading Kellen in a swift but controlled movement from the maintenance alcove to the secondary corridor. They timed their crossing to coincide with a momentary dimming of the light spot of the emergency protocol Lysandra had triggered and slipped into the passage undetected. Krythax's private domain was markedly different from the rest of the compound. Here, the militaristic austerity gave way to a display of power and wealth befitting a Kravtor warlord. The walls featured trophies from a dozen conquered worlds, while the floor was inlaid with rare minerals that caught and reflected the subdued lighting. The access way should be at the far end of his chambers, Lysandra indicated, her voice tense. A concealed door behind the ceremonial battle standard. They moved carefully through the empty rooms, alert for any sign of occupation. The absence of personal guards suggested Krythax had indeed relocated to the transmission chamber in preparation for the activation. 25 minutes remaining, Kellen noted, checking the time once more. They located the battle standard Lysandra had described, an enormous tapestry depicting Kravtor victories, dominated by the symbol of Krythax's personal clan. Behind it, as predicted, was a concealed door secured by a biometric scanner. This complicates matters, Lysandra frowned. The scanner requires Krythax's specific biological signature scale pattern, body temperature, even pheromone composition. Can we bypass it? Kellen asked, aware of each precious minute ticking away. Lysandra examined the scanner more closely. Not conventionally, no. But there might be another approach. She reached into a compartment of her environmental suit and produced a small vial containing what appeared to be fine metallic dust. Scale particles, she explained. Collected from Krythax during my time as his prisoner. I've kept them all these years, never knowing if they might prove useful. Will they be enough? Kellen asked, impressed by his swordmaster's foresight. For a partial match, perhaps. Combined with a specific electromagnetic pulse to confuse the temperature and pheromone sensors. She worked quickly, applying the scale particles to the scanner's surface while adjusting her bypass device to emit the necessary signal pattern. The seconds stretched into minutes as Lysandra worked, each moment bringing the activation deadline closer. Finally, the scanner emitted a soft tone of acceptance, and the concealed door slid open to reveal a narrow passage beyond. Well done, Kellen breathed, relief evident in his voice. Don't celebrate yet, Lysandra cautioned. This passage leads directly to the transmission chamber. Once we enter, there's no turning back. Krythax will be there, likely with his personal guard. Kellen's hand moved to the ceremonial sword at his side, the same blade he had nearly used against Krythax in the Arrowsong Palace. It seemed fitting that it would serve him now, in this final confrontation. "I'm ready," he assured her. Lysandra studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Remember your training. Control, not anger. Precision, not passion. Whatever happens in there, whatever Krythax says or does to provoke you, maintain your focus." With these final words of guidance, they entered the passage, moving swiftly toward the confrontation that awaited. The transmission chamber was a marvel of forbidden technology, a vast circular space dominated by a central platform surrounded by pulsing energy columns. Above, a domed ceiling of transparent material revealed the night sky of Dampton. The planet's 3 moons aligned in a rare configuration that bathed the chamber in ethereal light. And standing on the central platform, his scaled back toward them as he manipulated holographic controls, was General Krythax. They had entered through a concealed door at the chamber's periphery, momentarily unnoticed by the chamber's occupants. Besides Krythax himself, 4 personal guards stood at equidistant points around the platform, their attention focused outward, but they would spot the intruders the moment they moved further into the chamber. Lysandra signaled for Kellen to remain still as she assessed the situation. The general appeared to be in the final stages of preparation for the activation. Holographic displays surrounded him, showing the network of signal receivers across Dampton and the status of the power systems required for the mass transmission. At Krythax's belt hung a distinctive device, a cylindrical object with pulsing blue energy lines. The command key, without which the activation could not proceed. 18 minutes, Kellen whispered, checking the time. Lysandra nodded, then indicated the energy columns surrounding the platform. "Power regulation," she explained softly. "If disrupted, they could temporarily destabilize the entire system." Understanding her intent, Kellen drew the sonic disruptor she had given him earlier. With careful aim, he targeted the nearest column and activated the device at its highest setting. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The energy column fluctuated wildly, its steady pulse transforming into an erratic surge that cascaded to the adjacent columns. Alarms blared as the system's safety protocols engaged, attempting to compensate for the sudden instability. Krythax whirled around, his yellow eyes narrowing as they locked onto the intruders at the chamber's edge. For a moment, surprise registered on his scaled features, followed quickly by a cold calculation that Kellen found more terrifying than rage would have been. "The Arrowsong heir," the general's voice carried across the chamber despite the alarms. "How unexpected. And Lysandra, my former pet, returned at last to your rightful master." "I secure the chamber," he barked to his guards, who immediately moved to surround the intruders, weapons raised. "Stop the activation sequence, Krythax," Kellen demanded, stepping forward despite the guards' advancing forms. "We know everything: the neural manipulation, the planned coup, the mass execution of your own puppets." Krythax's expression remained impassive, but he made a subtle gesture that halted his guard's advance. "Impressive," he acknowledged. "You've discovered more than I anticipated, but you're too late. The activation sequence is already initializing. In 17 minutes, the new order begins a coalition freed from Arrowsong weakness, forged in Kravtor's strength." "You mean a coalition under your control," Lysandra countered. "With every official who opposed you conveniently eliminated by neural degradation, their deaths blamed on House Arrowsong." "A necessary purge," Krythax replied without a hint of remorse. "The cost of progress has always been paid in blood. Your grandfather understood this, boy." He directed this last comment to Kellen. "He simply lacked the conviction to act accordingly." The mention of his grandfather ignited Kellen's anger, but he remembered Lysandra's counsel control, not passion. "My grandfather believed in peace," he responded evenly. "In unity among the 12 systems, not domination through treachery and murder." Krythax laughed, a harsh sound like stones grinding together. Peace, unity, convenient principles for those who already hold power. Your dynasty has grown soft. Kellen Arrowsong. The universe requires stronger hands to guide it through the challenges to come. As he spoke, the general continued manipulating the holographic controls, the activation sequence progressing despite the earlier disruption to the power systems. The command key at his belt pulsed more rapidly now, in rhythm with the stabilizing energy columns. "Enough talk," Lysandra declared, drawing her weapon. "Surrender the command key, Krythax, end this now." The general's expression hardened. "I think not." With unexpected speed for his massive frame, he pressed a sequence of commands into the holographic interface. Instantly, a transparent barrier descended from the ceiling, separating Krythax on his platform from the rest of the chamber. His guards, now sealed outside the barrier with Kellen and Lysandra, turned to face the intruders with weapons raised. "Kill them," Krythax ordered, simply returning his attention to the activation sequence. The guards attacked in perfect coordination, their movements betraying years of elite training. Lysandra met the onslaught with equal skill, her body flowing between strikes and counters with practiced precision. Kellen found himself facing 2 opponents simultaneously, his ceremonial sword a blur of defensive movements as he struggled to maintain his position. "The barrier," Lysandra called between exchanges with her opponent. "It's molecularly reinforced. Our weapons can't penetrate it." Kellen understood the implication immediately. Even if they defeated the guards, they would still be separated from Krythax and the command key by an impenetrable barrier. The activation would proceed unchallenged. Desperation lent him strength as he fought, his training with Lysandra manifesting in movements more fluid and precise than he had ever achieved in the practice arena. One guard fell to a disabling strike to his knee joint, while the second was forced back by a series of aggressive advances that belied Kellen's youth and relative inexperience. Across the chamber, Lysandra had already neutralized one opponent and was systematically dismantling the defenses of the second. Her efficiency in combat was a stark reminder of why she had been chosen as swordmaster to the Arrowsong heir. But even as they gained the upper hand against the guards, the activation sequence continued behind the barrier. Krythax worked methodically, his scaled hands dancing across the holographic controls with practiced familiarity. 14 minutes, Kellen noted grimly as he finally incapacitated his second opponent. "We need to breach that barrier." Lysandra dispatched her final adversary with a precise strike to the base of the skull, then joined Kellen at the edge of the transparent wall separating them from Krythax. She examined it quickly. Professional assessment replacing combat focus. "Direct force won't work," she concluded, "and we don't have time to find the control mechanism." Kellen studied the transmission platform, searching for any vulnerability in its design. His gaze settled on the power regulation columns, now pulsing with increasing intensity as the activation sequence progressed. "The columns," he realized, "they're drawing power from somewhere, but if we could overload the source..." Lysandra followed his thinking immediately. "The primary power conduits run beneath the chamber floor. If we could access them, create a feedback surge large enough to overwhelm the safety protocols." "Where?" Kellen asked urgently. Lysandra scanned the chamber, her memory of the compound's architecture guiding her assessment. "There," she indicated a maintenance panel near the base of one wall. "Secondary access to the power distribution network." They moved quickly to the panel, Lysandra working to bypass its security while Kellen kept watch for any additional guards that might respond to the disturbance. "This is going to be loud," Lysandra warned as she exposed the complex network of power conduits beneath the panel. "And once we initiate the surge, the entire system will go into emergency shutdown. We'll have seconds at most to reach Krythax before backup systems engage." "Do it," Kellen urged, eyes fixed on the general who continued his preparations, apparently unconcerned by their efforts. Lysandra made a final adjustment to the exposed conduits, creating a connection that bypassed critical safety mechanisms. "On my mark," she instructed, positioning her hand to activate the surge. 3, 2, 1 now. She completed the circuit, immediately rolling away from the panel as energy began to arc wildly between the conduits. The effect cascaded through the chamber's power systems with devastating speed. The energy columns surrounding Krythax's platform fluctuated violently, their steady pulse transforming into an erratic storm of uncontained power. Alarms blared at deafening volume as the chamber's systems detected the catastrophic overload. Emergency protocols engaged automatically, shutting down power to all non-essential systems, including the molecular barrier separating Krythax from the rest of the chamber. The transparent wall dissipated just as secondary explosions began rippling through the power conduits, plunging sections of the chamber into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, bathing the space in a red glow that cast long shadows across the now exposed platform. Krythax snarled in fury as his protective barrier vanished, reaching for a weapon at his belt even as he continued the activation sequence with his free hand. "Now!" Lysandra shouted, already in motion toward the platform. Kellen raced forward, his ceremonial sword drawn, determination replacing the fear and anger that had driven him earlier. This was no longer about vengeance for a defiled family crest or even his grandfather's murder. This was about saving billions of lives across the 12 systems from Krythax's twisted ambition. The general met their charge with confident aggression, his weapon a short-range energy projector favored by Kravtor commanders firing in controlled bursts that forced them to separate as they approached the platform. Lysandra moved with incredible speed, circling to flank Krythax while drawing his fire away from Kellen. The general recognized the tactic but could not defend against both opponents simultaneously. 10 minutes to activation, Krythax announced with cold satisfaction, despite the immediate threat. Too late. Arrow song. The sequence is locked. Even without me, it will complete. Kellen leaped onto the platform, his sword aimed not at Krythax directly but at the command key hanging from his belt. If they couldn't stop the sequence, perhaps they could still prevent the transmission from reaching its targets. The general anticipated the move, twisting away while firing another energy burst that caught Kellen in the shoulder. Pain lanced through his arm, but the environmental suit absorbed the worst of the damage, preventing a disabling injury. Lysandra used the distraction to close distance, engaging Krythax in hand-to-hand combat where his energy weapon provided less advantage. Despite her skill, the general's natural Kravtor strength and armored scales gave him a significant edge in close quarters. With a powerful strike, he sent Lysandra sprawling across the platform, momentarily incapacitated by the force of the blow. "You trained her well," Krythax acknowledged to Kellen, advancing toward him with predatory confidence. "But she was my student first. I know every technique she might have taught you." Kellen readied his sword, mind racing through the training sequences Lysandra had drilled into him over years of preparation. Standard forms would be useless against an opponent who knew them as well as he did. Then he remembered her words from their training session after the ceremonial hall incident. Control, Kellen. Not the absence of emotion, but mastery over it. That is what separates a prince from a common soldier. In that moment, Kellen understood. He had been fighting this battle since Krythax spat on his family, Crest, fighting with anger, with vengeance, with the raw emotion that made him predictable and vulnerable. Now, with the lives of billions hanging in the balance, he found something beyond anger, a clarity of purpose, a focused determination that transcended personal grievance. As Krythax attacked, Kellen moved not with the formal techniques of arrow-song swordplay, but with an improvised style born of necessity and insight. He yielded where resistance was expected, advanced where retreat was anticipated. Each movement flowed from instinct rather than training, unpredictable because it emerged from the moment rather than memory. The general faltered momentarily, confused by the unfamiliar patterns of attack and defense. In that brief window of uncertainty, Kellen struck not at Krythax himself, but at the command key still secured at his belt. His blade severed the attachment mechanism, sending the device clattering across the platform. Krythax roared in fury, abandoning all pretense of tactical restraint as he lunged to recover the key. Lysandra, having regained her feet, intercepted him with a flying tackle that carried them both away from the fallen device. They grappled fiercely, her technique and speed matched against his raw power and natural armor. Kellen raced for the command key, scooping it up just as the chamber's emergency systems began to reset. Power returning to the transmission apparatus. The holographic displays showed 8 minutes remaining in the activation sequence, not enough time to fully abort the process, but perhaps enough to disrupt the transmission itself. "Lysandra," he called, holding up the key, "how do we disable it?" She couldn't answer, locked in desperate combat with Krythax. The general had gained the upper hand, pinning her against the edge of the platform with his superior strength. Kellen examined the device quickly, searching for any obvious deactivation mechanism. The pulsing blue energy lines seemed to converge at one end, where a complex interface would presumably connect to the transmission system. With no time for careful analysis, Kellen made a decision. Raising his ceremonial sword, he brought it down with all his strength upon the command key. The device resisted initially, its advanced materials designed to withstand conventional damage. But the arrow-song blade, forged from rare stellar alloys and imbued with family tradition, proved equal to the task. On the third strike, the command key shattered, releasing a pulse of blue energy that washed over Kellen like a wave of ice. Krythax's anguished howl echoed through the chamber as the holographic displays flickered and distorted. The transmission sequence continued its countdown. But the status indicators for the planetary network turned from green to red. Connections failing as the control signal degraded without the command key's regulatory function. "No," the general roared, throwing Lysandra aside with renewed strength born of desperation. He charged toward Kellen, all tactical restraint abandoned in favor of raw fury. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Kellen stood his ground, ceremonial sword raised to meet the onslaught. "Saved billions of lives," he answered simply. Krythax struck with terrible force, his scaled fist connecting with Kellen's blade and sending shockwaves up the young heir's arms. The sword held, but Kellen was driven back by the sheer power behind the blow. "You've doomed them," Krythax snarled, pressing his attack. "The neural implants are unstable without the command key to regulate their function. They'll degrade on their own now, more painfully, more chaotically. Your noble action condemns every implanted subject to a slow, agonizing death." Horror washed over Kellen as he understood the implications. In trying to prevent the mass execution, he had potentially made it worse, removed the quick, coordinated end Krythax had planned and replaced it with something more terrible. There must be a way to neutralize the implants, he insisted, desperately defending against the general's relentless assault. There isn't," Krythax sneered. "That was the beauty of my design. Once implanted, the neural technology is permanently integrated. It can be activated or deactivated, but never removed, not without destroying the host mind entirely. Lysandra had regained her feet and now rejoined the fight, attacking Krythax from behind. The general whirled to face this new threat, his scaled tail lashing out to keep Kellen at bay. "Wait!" Mira's voice cut through the chaos, startling all three combatants. She stood at the entrance to the transmission chamber, breathless as if from running. "I came back," she explained quickly, moving toward the platform with determined strides. "I couldn't leave without knowing." She stopped short as she took in the scene, the shattered command key, the failing transmission sequence. Krythax engaged in combat with both Kellen and Lysandra. "The implants," Kellen called to her urgently. "They're degrading without the command key. Is there any way to neutralize them without killing the hosts?" Mira's technical mind engaged immediately, processing the problem even as she approached the platform. "Maybe," she said, studying the holographic displays still functioning around them. "If I can access the master control protocols, rewrite the degradation parameters." "Impossible," Krythax growled, though he made no move to stop her. Perhaps even he recognized that his grand plan had unraveled beyond recovery. "The system architecture doesn't allow for command restructuring without the key." "All systems have back doors," Mira countered, her fingers already dancing across the holographic interface. "Especially ones designed by egotistical warlords who can't imagine being outsmarted by a teenage engineer." Her confidence seemed to enrage Krythax more than any physical attack had. With a roar of fury, he launched himself toward her, intent on stopping her interference at any cost. Kellen intercepted him mid-air, his ceremonial sword flashing in the emergency lighting as it caught the general across his armored chest. The blade didn't penetrate the scales, but the force of the blow diverted Krythax's charge, sending him crashing into one of the power regulation columns. "Alessandra," Kellen called, "keep him away from Mira." The swordmaster nodded, positioning herself between the general and the engineer. Krythax rose slowly, yellow eyes burning with hatred as he assessed his opponents. "You can't save them all," he taunted, circling warily. "Even if you manage to stabilize the implants, the evidence of my operation is exposed. The coalition will tear itself apart trying to determine who remains compromised, who can be trusted. Chaos will reign regardless." "Perhaps," Lysandra acknowledged, matching his movements with practiced vigilance. "But they'll face that chaos alive, with the truth rather than lies to guide them." Krythax laughed bitterly. "Truth? There is no truth in politics. Lysandra, you know this. Only perception, only power." His gaze shifted to Kellen. "Ask your father how many compromises has he made in the name of peace. How many enemies has he appeased rather than destroyed?" "Don't listen to him, Kellen," Lysandra warned. "He seeks to divide us even now." But Kellen had moved beyond being manipulated by Krythax's words. The clarity he had found during their combat remained, allowing him to see the general's tactics for what they were, desperate attempts to salvage something from his collapsing schemes. "I've got it," Mira exclaimed suddenly. "A stabilization protocol. It won't remove the implants, but it will prevent further degradation until a more permanent solution can be developed." "Implement it," Kellen ordered, keeping his attention fixed on Krythax. Mira worked feverishly, fingers flying across the holographic controls. "Executing now," she confirmed after several tense moments. "Transmission in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A pulse of energy surged through the chamber as the modified command was broadcast across the planetary network. The status indicators on the display shifted from red to amber, not the optimal green of full functionality. but no longer the critical failure state that would have resulted in mass neural degradation. Your neural implant stabilized. Mira reported, relief evident in her voice. The hosts will survive until proper medical intervention can be developed. Krithax's expression contorted with rage and disbelief. Impossible, he growled. The system architecture doesn't allow for... Your arrogance blinds you. Mira cut him off. You built backdoors into your own system emergency protocols that could override the command key in case it was ever turned against you. I simply repurposed them. The general seemed to deflate slightly, the full weight of his defeat settling upon him. His grand scheme years in the planning, meticulous in its execution, had been undone by 3 young intruders who had managed to outwit his security, bypass his defenses, and rewrite his own protocols. But Kravtor warriors were not known for accepting defeat gracefully. With a primal roar, Krithax charged not at his opponents but at the central transmission apparatus itself. If he could not control the neural network, perhaps he could still destroy it, and with it, the stabilization protocol that Mira had implemented, condemning thousands to neural degradation after all. Kellen reacted instinctively, his body moving before his mind had fully processed the general's intent. With a powerful leap, he intercepted Krithax mid-charge, his ceremonial sword driving forward in a technique Lysandra had drilled into him countless times. The Arrowsong Fury Strike, a desperate maneuver reserved for situations where victory mattered more than survival. The blade found its mark not against Krithax's scales but at the junction of his neck and shoulder, where the natural armor was thinnest. Steel penetrated flesh, drawing a spray of dark Kravtor blood as the general's momentum carried them both crashing into the transmission apparatus. Pain exploded through Kellen's body as they impacted, the ceremonial sword snapping under the combined pressure of the strike and collision. Electrical discharges from the damaged equipment arced around them, adding their own agony to the already overwhelming sensations. Through a haze of pain, Kellen was aware of Lysandra pulling him clear of the damaged apparatus, of Mira working frantically to maintain the stabilization protocol despite the physical damage to the transmission system, and of Krithax, mortally wounded but still dangerous, dragging himself toward a secondary control panel with clear intent to trigger some final act of destruction. No, Kellen gasped, struggling to rise despite Lysandra's restraining hand. He's not finished. Stay down, she ordered, already moving to intercept the general's final desperate effort. But it was Mira who reached Krithax first, her technical knowledge allowing her to recognize and neutralize the threat before he could activate whatever failsafe he had been attempting to reach. Transmission network secured, she announced, though her voice shook slightly as she stepped away from the dying general. Stabilization protocol holding. Krithax lay still now, yellow eyes fixed on Kellen with a mixture of hatred and something that might almost have been respect. Arrowsong, he rasped, dark blood seeping from the wound in his neck. Perhaps. Not so weak after all. Those were his final words. The light faded from his eyes, his massive form going slack as life departed. The general who had spat upon the Arrowsong family crest, who had murdered Kellen's grandfather, who had schemed to control the 12 systems through forbidden technology, was dead, defeated not by vengeance, but by justice. Kellen allowed Lysandra to help him to his feet, his body protesting every movement. The broken ceremonial sword still clutched in his hand seemed a fitting symbol for what had transpired, tradition shattered by necessity, yet still serving its ultimate purpose. We need to contact my father, he said, his voice steadier than he would have expected given the circumstances. The evidence must be secured, the affected officials identified and treated. Already done, Mira informed him, indicating a communications panel she had activated. I've established a secure channel to the Arrowsong Palace. Your father's personal guard is responding. Lysandra surveyed the damaged transmission chamber, her expression solemn. It's over, she said quietly. But the aftermath will not be simple. The coalition faces a crisis of trust unlike any in its history. Kellen nodded, understanding the challenges that lay ahead. Thousands of officials across the 12 systems would need to be screened for neural implants. Those affected would require treatment and rehabilitation. The power vacuum left by compromised leaders would invite opportunists and ambitious factions to seek advantage. And through it all, House Aerosong would need to provide stability, guidance, and leadership qualities that would be tested as never before. One step at a time, he said, moving to join Mira at the communications panel. First, we secure what we've won here, then we face what comes next. As he waited for the connection to his father to establish, Kellen's gaze fell upon Krythax's lifeless form. The anger and hatred he had carried since that moment in the ceremonial hall seemed distant now, replaced by a more complex understanding of conflict, duty, and the true meaning of honor. His family crest had been defiled, yes. But in defeating the one who had committed that insult, Kellen had discovered something more valuable than simple vengeance. He had found his own path to leadership, one forged in crisis and tempered by choice. The ceremonial hall of House Aerosong was silent as Kellen entered. Though unlike the silence that had fallen when Krythax defiled the family crest, this was a silence of respect and anticipation. 3 months had passed since the events in the Desert of Sorrows, months of upheaval and uncertainty across the 12 systems as the full extent of Krythax's neural manipulation scheme was uncovered and addressed. Kellen walked slowly toward the dais where his father stood, aware of the assembled dignitaries watching his progress. Representatives from all 7 species of the coalition were present, their formal attire indicating the significance of the occasion. The family crest hung once more in its place of honor, cleaned of the insult it had suffered but bearing a new addition, a small silver star, commemorating the defeat of Krythax and the preservation of the coalition. Crown Prince Therion awaited his son, his expression solemn but eyes warm with pride. Beside him stood Queen Regent Elia, regal as always but with a new softness in her gaze as it followed Kellen's approach. Lysandra and Mira were present as well, seated in positions of honor near the front of the assembly. The swordmaster's bearing was as impeccable as ever, though the events in the desert had left their mark a new scar along her jawline, a compliment to the older one on her neck. Mira looked uncomfortable in formal attire, but her technical brilliance had earned her recognition beyond the engineering district, her neural stabilization protocol having saved thousands of lives across the 12 systems. Kellen reached the dais and knelt before his father, head bowed in the traditional gesture of respect. Rise, Kellen Aerosong, Therion commanded, his voice carrying through the hall. Rise and stand before those you have served. Kellen obeyed, meeting his father's gaze steadily. They had spoken at length in private before this ceremony, discussed the challenges that still faced the coalition, the difficult road of recovery that lay ahead. But this moment was symbolic, a public acknowledgement of what had transpired. 3 months ago, Therion addressed the assembled dignitaries. Our coalition faced a threat unlike any in our history. Not fleets of warships or armies at our borders, but a cancer within neural manipulation technology deployed against our own officials, our own people by one who sought to destroy what generations have built. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The full extent of Krythax's operation had shocked even those who had always regarded the Kravtor with suspicion. That this threat was exposed and neutralized, that thousands of affected individuals were saved from neural degradation, that the evidence was secured and the perpetrator brought to justice for this, We owe a debt to 3 individuals who risked everything when the truth was most needed. He gestured toward Lysandra and Mira, who rose to acknowledge the assembly's applause. Then his attention returned to Kellen. "My son," Therion continued, his voice softening slightly. "You faced a choice between personal honor and greater duty, between vengeance and justice. The path you chose, the courage you demonstrated, the wisdom you found in crisis, these are the qualities of leadership that no title can bestow, no ceremony can create." He lifted a small object from a cushion held by an attendanta signet ring bearing the Arrow Song crest, traditionally worn by the Crown Prince. "This ring has been worn by heirs to House Arrow Song for 17 generations. Therion explained. "Today, it would rightfully pass to you, marking your formal recognition as Crown Prince and heir to all that our family has built." Kellen extended his hand, prepared to accept the significant symbol and the responsibility it represented. But Therion did not place the ring on his son's finger. Instead, he returned it to the cushion. "However," he continued, "you have demonstrated wisdom beyond your years, and in that wisdom I believe you will understand what I am about to propose." Confusion flickered across Kellen's features, though he maintained his composure before the assembled dignitaries. "The coalition faces unprecedented challenges," Therion explained. "Trust must be rebuilt, alliances reforged, wounds healed across 12 systems. This work requires leadership that understands not just diplomacy and tradition, but the complex realities of different worlds, different peoples, different needs." He gestured toward the star recently added to the family crest. "You have earned the right to wear this ring, Kellen. But I believe you have also earned the right to choose a different path, if that is your wish." Understanding dawned in Kellen's eyes as his father continued. "Before this assembly, I offer you a choice. Accept the ring today, assume your formal position as Crown Prince, and serve the coalition from the palace as tradition dictates, or postpone this formal recognition, and instead embark on a journey across the 12 systems, not as a prince on a ceremonial tour, but as an emissary of healing, learning from those you would one day lead, understanding their needs firsthand rather than through the filters of court protocol." The proposal was unprecedented, a departure from centuries of Arrow Song tradition. Kellen could see the mixture of reactions among the assembled dignitaries: surprise, confusion, and from some of the younger representatives, approval. He thought of all that had transpired since Krythax spat upon the family crest. The anger that had driven him initially, the lessons he had learned from Lysandra about control and purpose, the insights gained through confronting not just the general but his own expectations of leadership. The choice his father offered was really no choice at all, for Kellen already knew which path called to him. "I am honored by the trust this choice represents," he said, his voice steady as he addressed not just his father but the entire assembly. "The traditions of House Arrow Song have guided our coalition through centuries of challenge and change. They deserve respect." He glanced toward the family crest with its new silver star. "But tradition exists to serve the present and future, not to bind us to the past. The crisis we have weathered has shown us that our coalition requires more than diplomatic protocols and ceremonial gestures. It needs understanding, connection, healing." Kellen turned back to his father. "With your permission and the blessing of this assembly, I choose to postpone formal recognition as Crown Prince. Instead, I will journey throughout the 12 systems, learning from those we serve, building bridges of trust where Krythax sought to sow division." A murmur of approval spread through the hall, growing into applause led by the younger representatives. Even the more traditional dignitaries seemed to acknowledge the wisdom in this unconventional approach. Therion smiled, pride evident in his expression. "So be it," he declared. Let it be recorded that Kellen Arrowsong has chosen service over station, understanding over authority. The formal recognition of his position as heir is postponed until his journey of learning is complete. He placed his hands on Kellen's shoulders, a father's gesture transcending the formality of the occasion. May your path bring wisdom to you and healing to our coalition, he said softly. The ceremony continued with other matters of state, but for Kellen, the decision marked a turning point. As he rejoined Lysandra and Mira in